Chapter 1271. Ding ding. The sound of a bell rang from outside the door. Everyone's eyes lit up as they looked in the direction of the door at the same time. It must be Father who's back. Amy was the first to jump up. She skipped to the door and grabbed the doorknob. With a click, the door slowly opened outwards. "Father!" Amy exclaimed in surprise when she saw Meg standing at the door. However, she quickly stopped in her tracks and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She turned her face away and said with some grievance and anger, "Father is a bad guy. He got out of bed in secret and didn't bring Amy to beat up the bad guys. He also didn't make me breakfast. Amy, I'm feeling a little emotional. I want kisses, hugs, and to be lifted up high." Meg, who had already opened his arms and was ready to accept the little loli's hug, looked at the peeved Amy and smiled. He walked up to pick Amy up and kissed her on the cheek. He smiled and said, "Yes, it's Father's fault. I shouldn't have secretly set off without Amy's knowledge." As he spoke, he lifted Amy high above his head and then put her down again. He lifted her up again and put her down again, just like a little bird flying in the sky. He. Amy, who was still pulling a long face, laughed happily. After lifting her up and playing with her for a while, Meg hugged Amy and said with a smile, "So, have you forgiven Father now?" Amy thought for a moment and nodded. "If there's still a good meal, then I'll reluctantly forgive you." "All right, then I'll make lunch for everyone." Meg smiled and nodded. He carried Amy into the house. Everyone had been running around this morning, so it must have been tiring for them. "Uncle Meg, thank you." Anna went up and looked at Meg gratefully. "Good girl." Meg smiled and patted Anna's head. "Thank you," Shirley said gratefully as she stood behind Anna. She never thought that Meg would go against the wind forest for her and Phyllis and take such a huge risk to save them. To her, who had almost no friends since she was young, she was indescribably touched when she saw Yabamia and Elizabeth bringing the people from Lantist. "Thank you, boss, and everyone," Phyllis said gratefully as she looked at Meg with sparkling eyes. "You're welcome. Mamie Restaurant is like a big family. I hope everyone can live well. Even if Irina, he wouldn't be able to sit and watch. Sit down and rest for a while. I'll go and cook," Mag said to everyone as he put Amy down and walked to the kitchen. "Mr. Mac, you've raised these two little fellows to be picky. They don't want to eat my food anymore." Cece, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, looked at Meg helplessly. "Sorry to trouble you this morning. Why don't you invite Lulu and Lord Julian over for lunch? It'll be livelier with more people around," Meg said with a smile. "Sure. It would be great if we could get a free meal," Cece said with a smile. She took off her apron and hung it at the side. She walked towards the door and softly said, "I wonder if Lord Julian is back yet." Everyone sat down and waited for lunch. Barbara, on the other hand, was curiously asking Phyllis about Irina and the night elves. She was completely different from her usual arrogant and cold self. Amy followed Meg into the kitchen. Meg dumped the ingredients that Cece had cut into the kitchen waste bin at the side, and turned to look at Amy as he said, "Little Amy, go and wait outside too. Father will be done very soon." "Father, where's big sister Irina? Didn't you go to see her? Didn't she come back with you?" Amy asked softly as she walked up. Meg glanced outside, and then softly said, "She didn't come back with us, but she should be coming to Chaos City soon. Meg will be able to see her again very soon." "That's great. I like big sister Irina." Amy's eyes lit up, and a happy smile appeared on her little face. Speaking of this, Meg suddenly thought of Amy's death notebook. He wondered what the little fellow had recorded in it during this period of time. As he washed the vegetables, he tried to ask, Amy, that notebook of yours, don't worry, Father. I keep a record of it every day, Amy said with a smile. No, I mean. Meg felt a little flustered when he heard the word record. Don't worry. I've hidden it in a place where no one can find it. I'll definitely be able to pass it to big sister Irina. That's good. Meg sniffed. This little fellow was really strict. This made him a little flustered. Cece came back not long after. Apart from Lulu and Julian, Crassus also came. It seemed like the two of them didn't part ways immediately after they returned to Chaos City. Shirley and Phyrus expressed their gratitude to the two great magic casters. If it weren't for the two great magic casters' help, the night elves wouldn't have been able to hold on until the people from Lantis arrived. Mr. Mac, where did you find that gang? They're a little fierce, Crassus said curiously as he stood at the entrance of the kitchen and looked at Meg, who was cooking. That group of people in black suits was brought over by Yabamiya and Elizabeth, so they obviously had something to do with Amy's 10th-tier powerhouses with mysterious identities. This was enough for them to rule a territory on the Norland continent. However, even with his and Julian's knowledge, they still couldn't guess the origins of this group of people. They didn't even know which tribe they belonged to. You definitely wouldn't believe me if I said I met them by chance, but that's all I can say. Meg smiled. He didn't want to reveal too much about Lantis, even to Crassus and Julian. Crassus looked at Meg, and suddenly smelled the fragrant aroma of meat. He swallowed his saliva subconsciously, and pursed his lips. All right, I'm not the one who has a headache. If you say you met them by chance, then so be it. As long as there's lunch for me. Humph, baddie master, you didn't even bring me along to beat up the baddies. Little Amy is getting angry. Amy put her hands on her hips and turned her head away. Little Amy, we were afraid of waking you up. We'll definitely bring you along next time, okay, little Amy, which baddie do you want to beat up? We'll bring you to beat him up now. The two great magic casters who were over 100 years old started to coax the little girl. They weren't afraid of 10th-tier powerhouses, but how to coax their precious disciple gave them a headache. Let's get ready for lunch. Meg walked out personally with a big spicy grilled fish, and placed it in the middle of the big table that was put together by two tables. The dishes on the table were all removed, and the rich aroma wafted out. It was already past lunchtime, and everyone who was starving swallowed their saliva at the same time. Ding! Right at this moment, the bell rang outside the door. Calm. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1272. I'll go open the door. Amy was the first to run to the door. She jumped up and hugged the doorknob, and the door slowly opened outwards. Big Sister Irina. Amy exclaimed in surprise when she saw Irina standing at the door. Irina had changed into a long white dress somewhere. She was neat and tidy, just like that noble and proud princess. She looked at Amy with a smile, and stroked Amy's head. Long time no see, Amy. Oh. It's Princess Irina. Barbara stood up with her mouth slightly agape. She had just heard many stories about her from Phyllis, and they were as exciting as any heroes in history. She didn't expect to see her again so soon. Princess. Phyllis also stood up in surprise, and walked towards the door. Is Her Highness here too? Shirley also stood up. Although Irina had already said that the Night Elves were coming to Chaos City to develop, she didn't expect her to come to Mamie so soon. Is this Princess Irina? Anna looked at Irina curiously, and her eyes lit up. What a beautiful elf. What a beautiful elf. Is this the legendary Princess Irina? Cece looked at Irina in amazement. Lulu, who was sitting beside her, looked at Irina warily. Why is she here? Camilla, who had just picked up her chopsticks, dropped them on the table, and her expression became a little unnatural. Whoa. Meg looked at Irina, who was standing at the door, and his heart tightened. He suddenly had an ominous feeling. He thought he still had an afternoon to prepare for Irina's arrival, but he didn't expect her to arrive so soon. I seem to have come at the right time. Everyone wouldn't mind if I add a seat, right? Irina glanced at the table full of delicacies before her gaze landed on everyone with a smile. Her gaze lingered on Mag for a while, intentionally or unintentionally. Of course, no problem. Meg immediately moved a chair and placed it next to his seat. What a joke. How could he dare to say that there was a problem? As for the others, other than Camilla, there would naturally be no problem. As for the problematic Camilla, she was about to crawl under the table. This meal was too dangerous. She wanted to calm down under the table. Is this seat oiled? There shouldn't be any delicious food hidden under the table, right? Irina asked with a smile as she walked over while holding Amy's little hand. When she passed by Camilla, she gently grabbed her collar and lifted her up from under the table. I dropped my chopsticks. Camilla shook the chopsticks in her hand and smiled awkwardly. Well, it's good that the rope didn't fall off. Irina nodded and sat down beside Meg. She glanced at Meg with a smile. Camilla blushed. She suddenly remembered that other than Meg, Irina should be the only witness. This was too embarrassing. Meg looked down and picked up his chopsticks to pick up a piece of fish for Amy. He said carefully, "Be careful, it's hot." Shiraba. He could already feel it. It was too scary. And this could only be a beginner-level Shiraba. Are you going to pay back the wine you owe us so soon? Crassus chuckled as he looked at Irina. Yes, it's not good to owe wine for too long. If I can pay it back today, I naturally can't wait until tomorrow. Irina nodded with a smile, then looked at Meg. I'll go pour the wine. Meg quietly got up and walked to the kitchen. He suddenly felt that his status in the family had plummeted. I'll go help. Phyllis immediately got up and walked to the kitchen. When she took the 2 large glasses of beer that Meg had poured for them, she whispered, "Boss, I hope you don't mind. Her Highness is usually like this, but she doesn't mean any harm and doesn't mean to order you around." Well, I understand. Meg nodded. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he still had to put on a calm expression. All the adults were given a glass of beer, and the 3 children were given a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. Why am I getting orange juice? I want a drink too. Barbara looked at the juice in front of her and looked at Meg angrily. This was blatant disdain. She was the only one who drank juice like Amy and Nana. Minors are not allowed to drink. Meg pointed at a warning sign on the wall. It's not good for children to drink. They won't grow tall. Irina looked at Barbara and said seriously. That's right. Sister Barbara has to grow up faster. Anna is almost catching up with you. Amy took a sip of juice and nodded. Critical hit. Critical hit. Critical hit. Barbara took a sip of juice to calm herself down. Surprisingly, it was quite tasty. Everyone's gaze could not help but look at Meg, Irina, and Amy. This triple barrage of vicious words was really smooth and coordinated. Moreover, the 3 of them sitting together, the beautiful and noble Irina, the delicate and cute Amy, and the steady and handsome Meg, really did look like a family. However, everyone knew that Irina and Alex were the real couple. Today, Alex had killed everyone in the catacombs, killed Borg, and saved the night elves from disaster. Although Meg was also very outstanding and could make all kinds of delicious food, there was a big gap between him and Irina. They were not people who could walk together. Phyllis looked at Meg and Irina sitting together and tapped her finger lightly under the table. Then, she looked at Amy with some confusion. How did Amy know the princess? Julian looked at Amy, then at Irina. His gaze stopped on Meg's hand for a while, and he seemed to be deep in thought. Come, let's toast to defeating the wind forest together today. Crassus raised the wine glass in his hand and said with a smile. Cheers. Everyone clinked their glasses in the middle and finished their drinks in one gulp. This is Camilla, Countess Bartoli. She's now in charge of preparing ingredients in the restaurant. This is Cece. Beside her is Lulu. They're our neighbors. Meg started to introduce the people at the table to Irina. I'm Barbara. I admire you very much. You've helped me find my direction in life, Barbara said herself. Irina looked at Barbara and nodded slightly. Good luck. As long as you work hard enough, you should have a chance to see my back. I'll work hard. Barbara nodded seriously as if she had received great encouragement. You're druids. Irina turned to look at Cece and Lulu with some surprise and curiosity in her eyes. I heard that Helena got demons to exterminate the druids. I didn't expect druids to still exist in this world. Chapter 1273. Lulu's body tensed up, and she stared at Irina like a cheetah. Yes, perhaps we are the last pair of druids. Cece nodded. Even though she was smiling, there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Since the world tree is with you, then the druids haven't perished yet. However, there seems to be something wrong with your world tree. Irina looked at Cece, and her eyes narrowed slightly. You can tell. Cece looked at Irina with a hint of surprise and wariness in her eyes. The elves wanted to exterminate the druids precisely because the world tree could threaten the tree of life of the elves. Even though this speculation was completely baseless, it brought about the extinction of the druids. I grew up under the tree of life, so I can sense the unusual aura in you. However, you don't have to worry. I am different from Helena. I don't think the druids will cause any bad effects to the elves. You are just like us. You are all spirits of life nurtured by nature, so the tree of life chose us, and the world tree chose you. Irina looked at the two of them, and shook her head slightly. I can also sense that you are different. This is the first time that the world tree wants to get close to you. You are not a bad person. Cece nodded with a smile on her face. Lulu only relaxed after hearing that. Perhaps I can provide you with some help. Let me see your world tree after dinner, Irina said with a smile as well. I'll have to trouble you then. Cece nodded with a hint of hope in her eyes. Even though her body had recovered a lot during this time, her stomach still hadn't shown any signs of activity. If Irina could help repair the world tree, she might still have a chance to get pregnant. Everyone was a little confused by the conversation between Irina and Cece, but that didn't affect their enjoyment of the delicious food and wine. The hot spicy grilled fish and the cold beer were the best of the best. Together with all kinds of delicious food, this was a complete and sumptuous meal. Every dish was an extremely delicious experience. Although this red braised meat is a little fat, it's delicious. The meat is fragrant and melts in the mouth. It's fat but not greasy. This fish head is soft and refreshing. It's spicy and delicious. This roast duck, Irina, who had been trapped in the catacombs for half a month, was soon immersed in the delicacies. She was full of praise for each dish, and her gaze toward Meg grew more and more satisfied. Her husband was simply too amazing. What's the use of only knowing how to fight? You can't possibly fight every day at home, right? Finding a husband who fought fiercely outside and cooked delicious meals at home was simply too blissful. Hearing Irina's praise and feeling her admiring gaze, Meg felt a little smug. Yes, that was the feeling. Even if she was the high and mighty elf princess in the eyes of others, the powerful and independent master of the Dark Knight, she would still be captured by him after eating his medicine, food. Father, there's no more food in my bowl. I want to eat fish. Amy looked at Meg and pouted. Okay, I'll get some for you. Meg quickly stopped his floating heart and picked up a piece of fish for Amy. The atmosphere during lunch was unexpectedly relaxed and happy. Perhaps it was because Irina knew most of the people and didn't put on airs, so they didn't become nervous or awkward because of her participation. After lunch, everyone was a little tipsy after drinking a lot of beer. Crassus and Julian left noisily, saying that they wanted to find a place to have a good fight and determine the winner. Shirley left with Anna and her things. After she returned, Anna ended her lodging life in the restaurant. Let's go. Let me see your tree of world. Irina and Cece went to a corner. Cece spread her palms out in front of her, and a faint green light lit up from her lower abdomen. A small sapling quickly appeared on her palm. It was about 2 palms tall and had 3 small branches. However, there were only 9 leaves on it, and even though it was green and lush, it seemed to lack vitality. It looks quite different from the tree of life, and its aura is completely different as well. It feels natural. Irina's eyes lit up when she saw the tree of world. She stared at the complicated veins on the leaves for a long time, and then looked up at Cece. You and it were both severely injured, right? Yes. Not every time we run for our lives. Cece nodded. There was a hint of helplessness and sadness in her smile. Irina nodded slightly. She thought for a while, and then took out a small white porcelain bottle from the ring on her finger. She pulled the cork out, and a strong aura of life immediately rushed out. The tree of world seemed to have sensed the aura. Its leaves swayed slightly, as if they were being blown by a breeze. This is the lotion of life. Cece looked at the small porcelain bottle in Irina's hand in surprise. Lulu's eyes also lit up. They had thought about the lotion of life before, but it was extremely precious and could only be found in the wind forest, so they could only give up on the idea. Yes. It can heal some serious injuries. Maybe it will have some good effects on you and the tree of world. Irina nodded and passed the small bottle to Cece. The tree of life lives in your body. Drink it all and see if it has any effect. This is too precious. Cece hesitated. She didn't take the small porcelain bottle. Compared to a human, this is just a bottle of special dew that the tree of life produces every year. Irina shook her head and looked at her belly. Also, don't you want to be a mother? You two are the only druids left. Cece was stunned. She looked at the small porcelain bottle, and a hopeful look appeared in her eyes. A child. She had wanted to have a child all these years. However, she had lost the possibility of becoming a mother after that serious injury. Thank you. Cece took the small porcelain bottle with both hands. She stood up and bowed to Irina. Then she took a deep breath and poured the few drops of milky white lotion into her mouth. The rich aura of life enveloped her. It surged from her mouth to her limbs and bones, and rapidly healed the hidden injuries in her body. More of the aura of life turned into a light green light and surged toward the tree of world. The world tree, which was only the size of 2 palms, began to grow at a speed visible to the naked eye. Green leaves began to grow from the branches, and gradually, it became a small tree half a meter tall, full of green leaves. Its whole body was glowing, and mysterious runes could be faintly seen on the leaves. It looked quite mysterious. Cece slowly opened her eyes, and stroked her lower abdomen with elation on her face. She could feel that she seemed to have regained the ability to give birth to life, and because of the growth of the world tree, her powers seemed to have increased as well. Congratulations, you are now a level 9 sorcerer. Irina looked at Cece with a smile. Also, you can give birth to a child. An ordinary civil servant, by chance, returned to the 25th year of the Republic of China, was forced to join the military, to search for underground organizations, to track down Japanese spies, in the magnificent era of the motherland, to contribute his own strength to the liberation and revival of the nation, began his legendary career of espionage. Chapter 1274. Thank you, thank you. Cece stood up and bowed deeply to Irina. Her face was filled with surprise and gratitude. Thank you. Lulu bowed to Irina with a bashful smile. She looked at Cece with adoration and joy in her eyes. Irina shook her head with a smile and said, "You're welcome. Take it as a compensation from me on behalf of the Wind Forest. I hope the druids and elves can coexist peacefully in the future." "It would be best if we could coexist peacefully," Cece said with a smile. "Looks like we're going to have a little druid soon." Meg walked over with 2 cups of water with a smile. "Is that a little bear or a kitten?" Amy asked curiously as she came up to him. "Maybe a panda." Irina looked at Cece and Lulu. "That would be too precious." Meg raised his eyebrows. "It would be interesting if they really gave birth to a national treasure. I'll be very happy no matter what it is." Cece stroked her stomach gently, and a blissful smile appeared on her face as if there was already a little life inside. Meg looked at the tall world tree, and asked curiously, "I'm curious about something. Why is this tree called the world tree? Can it grow a world? I've only heard about this from the tribe leader once when I was young. After the world tree matures, it will form a small world of its own. The druids will live in that small world without any worries, and won't be disturbed by the outside world. However, before I was born, the world tree had already been destroyed, and the small world had also disappeared. Countless druids who had lost their homes died in the war between species." Cece shook her head, and there was a hint of loneliness in her voice. "I've read about it in the elven records. The world tree takes 1,000 years to fully mature. Even though you two also have a lifespan of 1,000 years, you most likely won't have the chance to live in that small world." Irina reached out and gently touched the leaf of the world tree. The leaf shrunk back shyly, looking very intelligent. "Even if we can't live there, it's a good thing that our children can live there," Cece said with a smile. She didn't feel disappointed. Instead, she looked forward to it. When Cece and the others left, Camilla had already found a chance to slip away. Phyllis cleared the table and came up to Irina. "Princess, where do you plan to go now?" "Where to?" Irina glanced at Meg, then smiled and said, "The food here is too delicious. I've decided not to go anywhere. I'll stay here." "Aw." Phyllis was a bit surprised. She glanced at Meg, leaned forward, and whispered, "Princess, with your status, you're not suitable to be a waitress. It won't be good if people know about this." Irina smirked. "Who said I'm going to be a waitress?" "I'm going to," Meg hurriedly said. "Princess Irina, do you want to stay overnight? There's a room upstairs that's empty. If you need it." But before Meg could finish his sentence, Amy had already grabbed Irina's hand and begged, "Sister Irina can sleep with me." Sister Anna left. "I'm so scared to sleep alone. I have no choice. It's always hard to refuse a lowly's request to sleep with her. Then I'll stay and sleep with Amy." Irina smiled and patted Amy's head. "That's great." Amy narrowed her eyes and rubbed her head against Irina's hand with a happy smile on her little face. Someone else intercepted you." Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at Irina and Amy, who had reached an agreement, the corners of his mouth also curled up slightly. Phyllis's mouth was slightly agape as she looked at Irina and Amy in disbelief. Why would Her Royal Highness, who didn't like children, suddenly agree to sleep with Amy? Could it be that Her Royal Highness wants to familiarize herself with taking care of children first? After all, young mistress is about the same age as Amy. I wonder where young mistress is now. Phyllis thought to herself, but she still asked hesitantly, Princess, are you sure you want to stay in the restaurant? Bean Sprout, have you entered your naggy old age? Irina reached out and flicked Phyllis's forehead. Ouch, it hurts. Phyllis held her forehead and nodded helplessly. Okay, then you can rest in the restaurant tonight. Do you have any other plans in the afternoon? No, I just want to have a good night's sleep in the afternoon. I haven't had a good night's sleep in a while. Irina shook her head, looking a little tired. Meg looked at Irina with some heartache. He looked at Phyllis and said, Phyllis, you should go back and rest too. I'll take care of Her Royal Highness. Let Mia and the others come to the restaurant for dinner tonight. We'll have a good celebration tonight. Okay, then I'll have to trouble you, boss. Phyllis nodded and left the restaurant, looking back repeatedly with every step she took. Go and rest first. Meg locked the door and walked to Irina's side. Irina was not in a hurry to go upstairs. Instead, she looked at Amy with a smile and said, Amy, have you been keeping a diary during this time? Yes, I've been very serious every day. I'll go get it for you. Amy immediately nodded and ran behind the counter. She pulled out the diary from behind a pile of books and handed it to Irina as if she was presenting a treasure. Come, let's go upstairs and take a look. Irina glanced at Meg, who had a calm expression. She held the diary in one hand and Amy's hand with the other and walked towards the stairs. Fuck. Did something happen? Meg's expression changed as soon as Irina turned around. 10,000 alpacas instantly ran through his mind. Although he still maintained his integrity and chastity during this time, it was inevitable that there would be some normal interactions at work when he worked with the employees every day. He could only hope that Amy did not write down the way Gina greeted him, the various confessions from the female customers, and Camilla sleeping on the floor in his room because she was too tired, all these things in the diary. Although he did not do anything. If he really wrote it down, it would be as if he did do anything. I miscalculated. I should have paid attention to this problem earlier and made improvements. Meg sighed in his heart. To uphold the bottom line of a qualified parent, he had not secretly looked through Amy's diary, so he was not able to grasp her recent records. After going upstairs, Meg realized that the big bed in the bedroom was already occupied by Irina and Amy. Looking at Irina nestled in Amy's arms and giggling as they read the diary together, Meg's lips curled into a gratified smile. He gently closed the door that was left ajar and quietly went to sleep on the floor in the children's room next door. What else could he do? In this family, his status was obviously declining rapidly. However, when he thought of Amy's smile, his heart felt as sweet as honey. The little fellow was indeed happiest when she was with her mother. There were some things that he could not replace. Amy closed the diary, looked up at Irina, and said seriously, Sister Irina, I think Father likes you very much. I also like you very much. Can you be my mother? Chapter 1275. Irina lowered her head to look at Amy. Her long eyelashes trembled slightly, and her azure blue eyes were filled with hope and expectation. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. When she first opened her eyes after being born, the little girl also looked at her like this. At that time, she only knew how to sob. In the blink of an eye, she had already grown so big. In the missing 3 years, she had always wondered if the father and daughter were still alive, if the little girl that was born from her body had grown up, if she was hungry. When she first saw her in the Magus Tower, the feeling of blood connection was so strong. She finally saw the child that was forcibly taken away again, and the little girl had already grown into a beautiful little girl. But the little girl didn't know who she was, and didn't know who her mother was. This feeling made her a little depressed, but for her safety, she could only choose to hide all of this. Now, she was holding the little girl like a mother, and the little girl was actually begging her to be her mother. How wonderful was this? Seeing that Irina was silent, Amy continued to promote her. Father is not only a good cook, but he is also a very, very good person. Also, let me tell you a secret. He is actually a super powerful knight. If you marry him, you will feel very safe. He can protect us. I know. He is a very powerful person. Irina nodded. Amy's face revealed a smile. Her father was indeed awesome. It seemed that he didn't need her to recommend him too much. I want to know, Amy, why do you want me to be your mother? Don't you miss your mother? Irina looked at Amy and asked softly, her left hand nervously grasping the bedsheet. I miss her too. Father said that she is a very beautiful fairy, but she went to the moon and he didn't know when she would come back. But I secretly asked big sister Barbara, and she said that there are no elves on the moon, so father must be lying. Amy's mother isn't on the moon at all. Amy pouted with an aggrieved expression. Irina's heart suddenly ached, and her heart was filled with self-blame. Although there are many beautiful sisters in the restaurant, father always looks very lonely. I think he likes you because when he looks at you, it's like there are little stars in his eyes. It's completely different from when he looks at other sisters. A smile reappeared on Amy's face as she gently touched Irina's cheek with her little hand. Also, I like you too. When I was dreaming, my mother looked exactly like you. If big sister Irina could be my mother, that would be great. Father would be very happy too. Looking at the smiling Amy, Irina couldn't help but smile as well. She pretended to think and said, if that's the case, it's a really hard request to refuse. Then agree. In the future, you can eat father's food for free. Another bowl of tofu pudding. Amy blinked her big eyes and said enticingly. I can't agree so easily. It'll depend on his performance. Irina shook her head, but a smile quickly appeared on her face. She lowered her head and kissed Amy's forehead. She gently pressed her forehead against hers and said, however, I'll allow Amy to call me mother when there's no one around. Really? Amy's eyes lit up. Of course. Irina nodded. Then can I do it now? Yes. Mother. Emichim, mother. Emichim, mother. 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 Emichim, Emichim, Emichim. That's great. Amy has a mother too. Amy kissed Irina's cheek and then jumped out of her arms. She jumped happily on the bed with an excited smile on her little face. Irina looked at the happy Amy and felt a lump in her throat, but her face was also full of smiles. From now on, I'll always be by your side. No one can bully you, Irina said in her heart. Amy jumped for a while and shrank back into Irina's arms. She looked up at her slightly, and said, Mother, go to sleep. I won't disturb you. After saying that, she closed her eyes obediently. Okay. Irina hugged Amy carefully, afraid that she would hurt her if she hugged her too tightly. However, she wanted to hug her even tighter. Although it was a little awkward, her heart was exceptionally peaceful, and she fell asleep very quickly. Meanwhile, Amy slowly opened her eyes and secretly looked at Irina. She looked left and right, and felt that her mother was the most beautiful person in the world no matter how she looked at her. It was just like a dream. After Mia and Elizabeth sent the people of Lantis back to the boundless sea realm, they brought Gina back to Amy's. After taking an afternoon nap, Meg, who was full of energy again, poured a glass of water for the three of them, and asked, "Did everything go smoothly?" Mia took a big gulp of water, and nodded. Nothing happened along the way. That's good. You've all worked hard today. Take a rest, and we'll have hot pot and barbecue tonight to celebrate the success of this mission and welcome back Phyllis and Shirley, Meg said to the three of them with a smile. I'm going back to my bathtub to soak for a while, Gina said. When she walked past Mag, she wanted to give him a hug out of politeness. Gina, you've worked hard today. Go soak in the fish tank for a while. Your tail is already showing. Meg said with a smile as he dodged Gina's deftly entanglement easily and glanced at her fishtail that was showing from under her skirt. What a joke. Irina was staying upstairs now. His every word and action had to be gentlemanly, and he definitely couldn't be caught red-handed easily. It's really out. Gina glanced at her tail, and quickly walked towards the stairs with small, quick steps. Although she had completely adapted to life on land, her fishtail would still appear when she was extremely tired. However, it would be fine as long as she returned to the bathtub to take a nap. Phyllis, Barbara, and the rest arrived soon after. Connie wrapped a scarf around her head a few times, and asked curiously as soon as she entered, I heard that Princess Irina is in the dining room. Can I ask her for an autograph? Is Princess Irina in the dining room? Mia and Elizabeth, who were sitting at the side, looked surprised at the same time. However, they didn't see her after looking around. She's sleeping with Amy upstairs. Meg tried to speak as calmly as possible. However, why did it sound like he was saying that his wife was taking an afternoon nap with his daughter? Although that was the truth, it wasn't the time to reveal everything yet. As expected, after hearing Meg's words, everyone looked at him differently. Calm. Wonderful book house. Chapter 1276. Meg furrowed his brows as the atmosphere became tense. He was trying to think of a way to explain the situation. The princess has just arrived at Chaos City, and she hasn't found a place to stay yet. She's very tired after the battle in the morning, so we had to trouble you to lend her a bedroom, Phyrus quickly explained as she looked at Meg apologetically. Sorry for the trouble. It's all right. It's just a small matter. Meg shook his head with a smile. How could it be called trouble for his wife? After hearing Phyrus's words, everyone seemed to have understood what was going on. Now that she said it, it seemed like there was no problem. Furthermore, they had seen Alex with their own eyes today. That man who rode a griffin into battle was completely different from Meg. You guys can sit for a while longer. We'll start eating when everyone is here, Meg said as he turned and went into the kitchen. Hot pot, barbecue, and a set meal were arranged. What a good sleep. Irina opened her eyes and stretched her back with a smile. The string in her brain that had been tense for months finally relaxed. Lying in the soft and warm bed and having a good sleep, she felt very satisfied mentally and physically. This feeling was simply too comfortable. Suddenly, she felt a movement beside her. She turned her head and saw Amy, who was lying in her arms, looking at her with her big eyes and a sweet smile on her little face. Mother, you're so beautiful, Amy praised. Amy has good taste. Irina nodded with a smile. There was nothing happier than to wake up with Amy in her arms and listen to her praises. Growl. Right at this moment, two stomachs sounded almost at the same time. The two of them looked at each other and laughed at the same time. All right, let's get up and eat. Irina got up. Her long silver hair, which almost reached her calves, cascaded down like a waterfall. Even after sleeping, it didn't affect its softness and luster at all. She picked Amy up from the bed and helped her put on her clothes clumsily. "Mother, I want to tie my hair into a bun," Amy said to Irina as she sat on the edge of the bed and scratched her messy hair. "A bun?" Irina looked at Amy in confusion. "It means tying your hair up like a small bun." Amy gestured to her head and added, "Father is very good at it. Don't you know how to do it?" Who said I can't? I'm much better than him," Irina said confidently. When it comes to hair tying, she can't lose to Meg, but will it really look good with a meatball tied on the head? This made Irina somewhat suspicious of Meg's aesthetics. "I'm sitting properly." Amy hugged her little makeup box and sat down obediently. Irina stroked Amy's soft hair and asked, "Amy, do you want a big meatball or a small meatball? Can it be made into a big meatball?" Amy was a little surprised. Her father had always tied her hair into small meatballs. She had never tied a big meatball before. "Of course, there's nothing I can't do." Irina nodded proudly. "Then I want a big meatball. I like to eat big meatballs." Amy nodded repeatedly and looked at herself in the mirror expectantly. "If it's a big meatball." Irina hesitated for a moment, then her 10 slender fingers started moving on Amy's head. "Father, do you think my big meatball looks good?" Amy ran downstairs and jumped to the kitchen door as she shouted at Meg, who was in the kitchen. "This." Meg, who was about to taste the soup, turned around and saw Amy with her silver hair tied into a big hollow meatball on top of her head like a bird's nest. His hand trembled and spilled the soup. "What kind of surreal hairstyle is this?" "Meow." Upon hearing Amy's voice, Ugly Duckling, which was lying on the counter and taking a nap, opened its eyes. It was so shocked that it jumped a meter into the air, and all its hair stood on end as it looked at Amy in horror. Everyone looked at Amy's filial hairstyle with astonishment. They had never seen Boss tie up such a wild hairstyle for Amy before. Meg was just thinking about how to comment on this spectacular bird's nest hairstyle. After all, this hairstyle was not something that ordinary people could pull off, let alone a cute little girl like Amy. "I did it for Amy," Irina said to Mag as she came downstairs to the kitchen door. She looked a little smug and nervous at the same time. Meg looked at Irina, who seemed to be very satisfied with her work, and swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. He quickly squeezed out a sincere smile, and said to Amy, "It's really beautiful. It's even prettier than the little meatballs that Father tied for Amy. I'm sure the birds will like it when we go out." "Wow, big sister Irina is really awesome." Amy turned to look at Irina with little stars in her eyes. "It's a piece of cake. If Amy likes it, I can do it for you often in the future." A smile appeared on Irina's face. She felt very accomplished after receiving Meg's praise. She looked at Meg with a gentle gaze. Meg turned around and continued to taste the soup. He heaved a long sigh of relief. "Thank goodness I'm quick-witted. I almost couldn't help but complain." So it was Princess Irina who tied it up. Everyone, who had thought that the hairstyle was a little strange, suddenly understood. Perhaps it was a new trend in the wind forest. Although it looked a little strange, it was very close to nature in the forest. Phyllis looked at Irina with a little surprise. The princess had always kept her hair long because she didn't want to comb it. Hair that had been kissed by the god of life didn't have to worry about knots and tangles. Even a strand of hair falling out occasionally was a small occurrence. "Hello. Hello, Princess Irina. I'm your loyal fan and have admired you since I was a child. Can I have your autograph?" Connie dashed forward and stopped in front of Irina. She bent over at a 90-degree angle and handed over a pen and paper with both hands as she said agitatedly. Orc. Cat girl. Irina looked at Connie's slightly trembling pink ears and couldn't help but reach out and pinch them. Connie, who was bent over, let out a moan. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed at Irina's feet. She looked up, blushed, and panted slightly. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at Irina with a wronged expression. Has she been trained? How did she fall so skillfully? Irina withdrew her hand and looked at Connie teasingly. This little fellow was really interesting. It was as if there was a switch installed on her ears. She fell with a gentle pinch. She looked at her cat ears that had become more pink and soft, and asked curiously, "What will happen if I blow air into them?" Chapter 1277. Princess Irina touched my ear. Connie shuddered. Although her ears hadn't been blown yet, she already felt a little itchy. But her expression was a little excited. Being touched by her idol was such an intimate action. That was too blissful. Princess Irina was even more beautiful than she had imagined. Her exquisite face was like the most perfect sculpture by the gods. Her noble aura was far superior to any woman she had ever seen. Her silver hair flowed down her back like a waterfall. She was indeed the most beautiful woman in the world. She had loved hearing stories about Princess Irina ever since she was a child. Regardless of whether it was her love affair with Alex or the shocking thing she had done, she had left behind many legends on the Norland continent. Even Alex's brilliance couldn't overshadow her in the slightest. She was still the elven princess, and not just Alex's woman. Connie blushed slightly as she extended her ear toward Irina, and said expectantly, "If you like, please touch it to your heart's content. Then I won't stand on ceremony." Irina reached out to pinch Connie's ear again. It was soft and warm, and she would squeal whenever she pinched it. It was indeed very interesting. Ha! She successfully tamed the cat-eared girl. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly as he looked at the squealing Connie being tamed by Irina. He fell into deep thought. Something didn't seem right. Isn't Connie too happy? No, I have to think of a way. Barbara, who was standing at the side, looked enviously at Connie who was being caressed. She was also Irina's die-hard fan now. Princess Irina looks even more beautiful up close. She's like a goddess from heaven. Yabamia looked at Irina enviously. Elizabeth placed her hand gently on Mia's shoulder, and whispered into her ear, "You're a princess too. You don't have to be envious of others. I just want to be a waitress. I don't think I can be a princess." Mia shook her head, but she didn't look disappointed. Instead, she looked quite satisfied. Elizabeth looked at Yabamia with a smile on her cold face. "That's good too. Mamis is pretty good. Where is Little Bat?" Irina played with Connie's ears for a while. She curiously searched for Camilla in the restaurant. She was a mature woman who liked to play. She was quite interesting. "Camilla said she has something to do tonight, so she won't be coming," Barbara said. "I see." Irina felt a little regretful. She hadn't figured out what had happened last time. She should have let her, talk for a while before he knocked her out with a stool. "All right, let's eat. Let's eat the hot pot first, then I'll grill the meat skewers for everyone." Meg pushed the small dining cart out of the kitchen and placed the white pot in the middle of the hot pot table. Then, he gestured for everyone to take a seat. "What is this? Are we eating it now?" Irina asked curiously as she looked at the hot pot. Phyllis and Shirley were also curious. They hadn't seen hot pot before they left. "This is hot pot. When the soup is boiling, put the ingredients into the pot. Meg took out a hot pot recipe book and handed it to the three of them. Then, he explained to them how to eat hot pot in detail. How could hot pot and barbecue be without beer? A large wooden barrel was already set up at the side. Other than the 4 children, everyone's cups were already filled with clear beer. "We beast men can drink too," Connie protested as she shook the fruit juice in her blanket. "Don't you have to ride your bike to learn from your master tonight?" Meg placed the boiled duck intestine into Amy's bowl. "This little bit of alcohol won't affect my learning. I can hold my liquor very well," Connie promised. "I'm talking about drunk driving." Meg shook his head and said calmly, "There are thousands of roads, but safety comes first. Drinking while riding a bike will make your family cry." Connie looked at Meg resentfully and took a big gulp of her fruit juice. Barbara also took a sip of her fruit juice. Sure enough, it tasted even better when someone was drinking fruit juice with her. Meg boiled a piece of tripe and was about to put it into Amy's bowl. Irina, who was sitting next to Amy, glanced at the tripe, then looked up at Meg. Meg's hand froze. He looked at Amy, then at Irina. He felt a tinge of jealousy. Their identities hadn't been made public yet, so it didn't seem appropriate for him to boil Irina's tripe. But it also didn't seem appropriate for him to only boil it for Amy. Wasn't this too difficult? Big sister Irina hasn't eaten hot pot yet. "Father, you must have boiled this tripe for her. Let me help you put it into her bowl." Amy, who was sitting between the two of them, picked up her chopsticks and put the tripe into Irina's bowl. Then she smiled as if she was presenting a treasure. "This tripe is super delicious." "Thank you, Mr. Mac, for your hospitality," Irina said to Meg with a smile, emphasizing the words, "Mr. Mac." "You're welcome." Meg wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Luckily, Amy was smart. Otherwise, he wouldn't know how to deal with this. Amy glanced at Meg and gave him a look that said, "I can only help you this much." Meg blushed with shame. It wasn't his style to use a child as a wingman when flirting with girls. Irina picked up the tripe with her chopsticks and put it into her mouth. The spicy and crispy tripe made a crunching sound as she chewed on it. It was like her teeth were playing a beautiful melody, bringing her a very pleasant enjoyment. "This tripe is so delicious." It was a thin slice, and she swallowed it very quickly. Irina looked at Mag, longing for more. "I'll teach you how to boil it. Pick up a piece of tripe and put it into the boiling hot pot. Wait for a second, lift it out of the red soup, let it cool in the air for a second, and then put it back into the red soup. Repeat this 7 times, and the tripe will welcome its most glorious moment." Meg naturally put the piece of tripe into Irina's bowl and said, "Try it." Irina picked up the piece of tripe and put it into her mouth. Feeling the delicious taste blossom on the tip of her tongue, she revealed a satisfied smile and nodded. "Yes, it's also very delicious. But I didn't see it clearly just now. Mr. Mac, can you demonstrate it to me again?" "In that case, I can only demonstrate it to you again." Meg smiled a little helplessly. He picked up another piece of tripe, boiled it, and put it into Irina's bowl again. "How do you boil this?" "This is fat beef. Also put it into the soup pot with chopsticks, but it's faster than the tripe." "What about this one with a hole?" "This is lotus root slices. It needs to be boiled for a while." Then, everyone at the table looked at Meg with a strange expression as he taught them step by step, rinsing all kinds of ingredients and putting them into Irina's bowl. Everything seemed to be fine. A princess who wasn't very good at using her hands and a hospitable boss. However, why do I smell a strange sour smell? Connie leaned over and whispered to Barbara. "I smell it too." Barbara nodded and lowered her head to sniff her dipping sauce. "Did I put too much vinegar in it? Have you learned it?" Meg asked with a smile as he put 2 pieces of potato into Irina's bowl. Chapter 1278. Meg's heart suddenly skipped a beat at the sight of Irina's smile. She was like a barefooted young girl in a field of blossoming spring flowers, so pure and beautiful. Crap, it's the feeling of my heart beating. Meg's brows furrowed slightly as he could already feel his heart beating in an abnormal manner. Irina's smile widened at the sight of Meg's unnatural expression, and she said, "I want to eat kebabs right now." Everyone rolled their eyes at Meg and Irina. Even though they hadn't eaten anything, they still felt a strange sense of fullness. Amy nodded with satisfaction as she looked at Meg with a gratified expression. She seemed to be very pleased with her father's performance. "You guys eat, I'll go make kebabs for you." Meg got up and walked toward the kitchen with a smile on his face. Irina was still as innocent and romantic as ever. This night belonged to everyone at Mamie's. There was hot pot, barbecue, and an unlimited supply of beer. After being separated, they were reunited again. They had gone from strangers to acquaintances from all over the world. Perhaps it was a miraculous fate that brought people from all over the world together because of Mamie Restaurant. "I like Mamie's, I like everyone, I want to stay here forever, with everyone." Yabamiya raised her hand with a flushed face, and before she could finish her sentence, she collapsed in Elizabeth's arms. Elizabeth's face was also slightly red, but she was clearly still sober. She hugged Yabamiya with a resigned expression, and her eyes were filled with doting love. If she could live happily like this forever, then staying at Mamie's would be a pretty good thing. "Let's all get drunk, then I'll carry all of you back one by one." Barbara propped up her chin with one hand as she chewed vigorously on the beef cubes in her mouth. Even though there was no alcohol to drink, she could still eat an unlimited supply of kebabs, and that was a super blissful thing. "If I go back to the Moon Nation, I won't be able to eat such delicious kebabs. If the teleportation portal is fixed, should I go back?" Barbara was a little troubled as she thought about it. Even though there was no one to serve her here, and she couldn't enjoy the admiration of everyone, her life seemed to be quite interesting. She could eat all kinds of delicious food every day, and she had friends who were on par with her. It was much more interesting than being in the palace of the Moon Nation. Meg passed the last kebab to Amy as he looked at the drunken ladies, and said, "Let's call it a day. Everyone is a little drunk. Let's go back and have a good rest. And rest. I'll do the cleaning work." He felt that he seemed to have underestimated the women's alcohol tolerance. They actually drank all the 50 liters of beer in the barrel. I'm not drunk." Gina, who had already transformed into a fish tail, stood up unsteadily. She walked around and found Meg. Then, she walked in a snake-like manner to Meg. She revealed a silly smile, and said loudly in Lantistian, "Mr. Meg, I like you." She closed her eyes as soon as she finished her sentence, and pounced on Meg. The wine glass in her hand also fell to the ground. Meg quickly caught the glass with one hand, and grabbed Gina's waist with the other to prevent her head from hitting the corner of the table. Phew! Meg heaved a sigh of relief as he looked at Gina, who had already fallen asleep. Luckily, he was quick to react. "What did she say just now?" Irina stood up with the wine glass in her hand. She glanced at Gina, who was in Meg's arms, and asked Meg with drunken eyes. Meg's expression froze instantly. Although it was Gina's drunken words that couldn't be taken seriously, could they be repeated? However, he quickly realized that Irina didn't understand Lantistian. He was the only one in the entire restaurant who could understand those words. His expression immediately returned to normal, and he smiled. "She said she was drunk, and asked me to help her back to sleep. Is that true?" Irina's beautiful eyebrows furrowed slightly, and she looked at him with a questioning gaze. She's still staying in the fish tank upstairs, and everyone is drunk. So, I had to help her up, Meg said calmly. Then, you can help her up. Irina nodded. She knew that Gina was staying in the restaurant the last time, and Gina was indeed drunk. Meg carried Gina horizontally, and walked towards the stairs in a gentlemanly manner with a fist's distance between them. Meg heaved a sigh of relief when he turned at the staircase. Luckily, he was quick-witted. Otherwise, he didn't know if he would have to suffer the pain of domestic violence tonight. Meg opened the door, and placed Gina gently into the big fish tank. Gurgle, once she entered the water, Gina began to spit bubbles while wagging her tail. The bubbles of various sizes formed a string as if she was going to spit out all the beer bubbles that she drank earlier. It should be fine, right? Meg observed for a while to make sure that Gina wouldn't be in danger from vomiting and choking herself before going downstairs. Yabamiya and the rest had already left, but the dining table had been cleaned up. Look, is it done well? Irina asked Meg as she turned to look at him. Meg took a look at the bowls and plates that were cleaned but stacked up like children's building blocks. He raised his eyebrows slightly, but still nodded with a smile as he looked at the expectant Irina. It's perfect. This kind of work is too easy. There's no challenge at all. Irina might look relaxed, but she couldn't hide the smile in her eyes. Meg walked up and smiled at Irina. Yes, it's such a waste to let you do this kind of work. There happens to be an empty lady boss position in the restaurant. Are you interested in considering it? Amy, who was hugging Ugly Duckling and squatting at the side, had her eyes lit up as she whispered to Ugly Duckling, "Wow, is father enlightened? Lady boss." Irina looked at Meg with a smile and said, "Beg me. There are so many young ladies eyeing this position. If you miss it, it won't be there." Meg smiled. "There are even more men eyeing me. If I miss it, it'll be someone else's." Irina's lips curled up slightly. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. This was to determine his status in the family. For the sake of his future status in the family, he definitely couldn't give in so easily. He had to, father, just give in. "You can't beat big sister Irina anyway," Amy said with a serious expression. Meg was instantly speechless. His daughter's words were really hurtful. He didn't deserve to have status in the family. Amy walked over to Irina with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She rubbed her head against Irina's hand, and happily said, "Also, big sister Irina has already agreed to be my mother." Meg looked at Irina with a hint of surprise. Someone doesn't seem to be sincere. Irina picked up Amy and sighed softly. Looks like Amy can sleep with me in the future. Chapter 1279. That's great. I like to sleep with mother. Amy said happily. She threw Ugly Duckling aside and hugged Irina's neck happily before kissing her on the cheek. I like to sleep with Amy too, Irina said with a smile. She also kissed Amy on the cheek before looking at Meg proudly. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked at Amy resentfully and moved closer to Meg. In this family, it had also lost its status. Meg looked at the mother-daughter pair and was surprised that Irina would come clean with Amy so quickly. He also felt a little guilty. After coming to this world, he had been very cautious and restrained. Whether it was the hatred that Alex carried or this world that was gradually becoming chaotic, it could easily crush him and Amy. With the activation of Amy's, his strength had also gradually increased. However, compared to those enemies, it was still not enough. Therefore, he lived even more cautiously, and carefully erased any connection between Alex and Amy's, including Irina. Amy had asked him several times about her mother, and Meg made up a fairy tale. Even after meeting Irina in Rodu, he still didn't tell her that Irina was her mother. Now that he thought about it, he was indeed not a good father, nor a good husband. He lived too cautiously and carefully. He restrained his emotions and tried to make Amy control her emotions too. A 4-year-old child with her mother right in front of her, but he still wanted to continue hiding it from her. He was really a terrible father. Irina looked at Meg and seemed to read his thoughts. She smiled and said, "Meg is a very smart child." "Yes, Amy is the smartest child I've ever seen." Meg nodded and looked at Amy with a smile on his face. "Yes, much smarter than a certain someone." Irina glared at Meg before carrying Amy to the stairs. "Amy, let's go upstairs and sleep." "Wait a minute," Meg suddenly said. He reached out and picked up a bouquet of blue roses that the system had delivered in real time. Irina turned around and looked at Meg. She looked at the big pot of blue flowers in his hand with a hint of surprise in her eyes. When did he prepare flowers? "This beautiful elf lady, would you be willing to become the lady boss of Amy's?" Meg went down on one knee and handed the bouquet to her. "Wow, what beautiful flowers." "Mother, just say yes," Amy egged in Irina's arms. Irina looked at Meg, who was kneeling on one knee and looking at her with clear and passionate eyes. The faint fragrance of the flowers wafted over, and the blue roses shone with a devilish luster under the light. Irina's nose twitched slightly, and a glimmer of light appeared in her eyes. It had been 3 years. In the 3 years that she had lost them, she had lived in despair every day. She had no one to rely on, and she could only live on the belief of revenge. And now, their family of 3 was finally together again. Then Irina sniffled and reached out to take the bouquet. She raised her chin slightly and put on a proud expression. "Then I'll reluctantly accept." "That's great. Then we're a family." Amy clapped her little hands happily. She didn't expect her father to be so powerful. He had managed to trick her mother so quickly. And from today onwards, she would also have a mother and a father. This was too blissful. Meg stood up and spread open his arms to embrace Irina and Amy. The 3 of them leaned their heads together and smiled happily. "No one will be able to separate our family again," Meg said with certainty in his heart. Irina pressed her forehead against Meg's, and the panic and emptiness in her heart were instantly filled with the warmth of a family. She found peace and happiness. Meg also had a smile on his face, and he was overjoyed from his successful confession. He was sure that he had already fallen in love with Irina. This naive and romantic elf, this adorable and kind woman, this tenacious and powerful queen. In 2 worlds, there had never been a woman who could attract him so much. He wanted to protect her and make her his. She was not under his control, and she had her own thoughts and persistence. It turned out that such a person was the one he truly wanted. "Although I agreed to be the lady boss, I'm only the lady boss for now." Irina looked at Meg with a hint of warning. "As for the rest, it'll depend on your performance." "Okay, lady boss." Meg nodded immediately. He felt an inexplicable sense of regret. As for his status in the family and his position as the husband, were they important? "What else is there?" Amy asked curiously. Irina and Meg were stunned at the same time. They looked at each other and laughed at the same time. "After eating hot pot, you smell like hot pot." Irina changed the topic and sniffed Amy's hair. "Your hair too." "Wait a moment, I'll go fill the tub for you. Take a bath before you go to bed." Meg immediately cleared the dishes and went upstairs to fill the bathtub with warm water. This bathtub is quite big. Irina bent down and scooped some water with her hand. She looked up at Meg. Her neckline sank slightly, revealing her fair skin. "Actually, I'm also." Meg reached out and unbuttoned a button. You can take a bath and go to bed too. Next door. Irina straightened up and pointed in the direction of the door with a smile. There was a hint of a mischievous smile in her smile. Okay. Meg obediently buttoned his shirt, then squatted down and kissed Amy on the forehead. He smiled and said, Amy, you have to sleep well. Father won't tell you a bedtime story today. Good night, baby. Okay, good night, Father. Amy kissed Meg on the cheek, then whispered in his ear, I'll put in a good word for you to Mother. Good girl. Meg smiled and patted Amy on the head. With a daughter like this, what more could a man ask for? What are you whispering about? Irina looked at the two of them. Amy said with a little jealousy, Father told me to take good care of Mother. He's so biased. I'm the baby. Okay, Mother will take care of you. Irina picked up Amy and rolled her eyes at Meg, but she couldn't hide the smile at the corners of her mouth. Now you're a master at flirting. Meg looked at Amy with some admiration. The little girl's mouth could be as cold as winter, but also as sweet as honey. He should learn from her. Then you two go to bed early. The pajamas are on the bed. There's a new set of clothes in the wardrobe. You can wear them tomorrow, Meg said, then turned and walked out of the bathroom. He put the pajamas that had just been delivered by the system on the bedside, then opened the wardrobe door to confirm that the custom-made dress for Irina was in place. Only then did he close the bedroom door and go out. Chapter 1280. Soon, a 3D model of the restaurant appeared in Meg's mind. On the surface, it looked similar to Amy's. It was also a 2-story building, but the outer wall structure was more simple and streamlined. However, Meg still found it hard to associate it with a supersonic flying machine that could travel at 5 Hz. Meg used his mind to control the model and found 16 thrusters at the bottom of the restaurant. The thrusters were conceived by a science fiction writer in your country. If it is enlarged, it can theoretically propel the Earth forward. Of course, I have improved it a little. It is not burning stone, but nuclear power, the system said proudly. Using this to propel the restaurant is really extravagant, Meg was speechless. It was a pity that he did not make it in time for the movie. He only saw the trailer before he transmigrated. This shouldn't be the flying mode, right? Meg asked again. The restaurant can switch to the flying mode in 3 seconds and take off in 5 seconds. The supersonic acceleration time is 10 seconds. This is the normal mode. Let's switch to the flying mode and see, Meg said in his mind. Switching to the flying mode, the restaurant model began to change. It gradually became round, with the lower end protruding and the upper end becoming small. The whole thing turned into the shape of a water droplet. The thrusters were all over the flying machine. Fuck, this flying machine is a little ugly. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at the water droplet-shaped restaurant, he felt that it was a little familiar. This is the latest model of the flying house. It gathers the most advanced aviation technology. While achieving extreme speed, it also has a very rich operating space. For example, this, and this, then, Meg saw a shooting star scurrying madly in his mind. Alright, stop your boring showing off. Meg rolled his eyes. He was dazzled. This system was really giving him a headache. Then, Meg clicked on the interior of the restaurant to take a look. The internal structure of the restaurant was similar to Amy's, but there was an option to change the style with one click. According to the requirements of the mission, the host can change the style of the restaurant with one click, so that the restaurant can better integrate into the local area, the system quickly explained. This function is quite practical. Meg nodded. Although he didn't know what kind of mission the system would give him, it was equivalent to adding a changeable function to the restaurant, which would save him a lot of money. After exiting the restaurant, Meg closed his eyes and began to rest. Today, in order to perform for 15 minutes, he had seriously overdrawn his body. As soon as he lay down, exhaustion began to surge. City Lord's mansion. Roland looked at Michael and said softly, "It has been confirmed that 2 employees from Mamie's have returned. Irina has been eating at Mamie's for lunch and dinner." Michael pondered for a moment before looking at Michael. "What do you think? Rankster's daughter is now at Mamie's. A few days ago, that half-dragon girl seemed to have successfully awakened the bloodline of the Golden Dragon tribe, and received Jinx's care. She should already have the ability to transform." "You mean the 2 giant dragons that appeared in the underground cavern were the 2 waitresses from Mamie's, and the appearance of those mysterious people is also related to Mamie's?" Michael frowned. "Actually, we should have noticed long ago that Meg is a very mysterious person. Although some evidence pointed to him as a fugitive young master from a fallen family in Rodu, a thief caught by the Grey Temple yesterday inadvertently revealed something. That fugitive young master died outside Mamie's on a rainy night some time ago, but the Grey Temple and the City Lord's mansion didn't receive any reports related to this matter." The corners of Roland's mouth curled up slightly. Although he didn't mention Meg's appearance in Rodu gave people the impression that he was that fugitive young master. Is this really just a coincidence? Who do you think he is? Michael looked into Roland's eyes, and lowered his voice even more. 4 years ago, the demons, the Magus Tower, and the elves worked together to set up a trap to kill Alex and completely cripple him. Not long after, news of his death spread. After 3 years, Alex appeared again, and killed Benson, the spatial demon, at his peak power to save Irina. He announced his return, but there was an additional mask on his face. And, very coincidentally, Meg happened to be in Rodu at that time because he was invited by the Rolf King. An ordinary restaurant owner suddenly became concerned about the general situation of the world, and because the waitress of the restaurant asked us to help the night elves. And after we rejected them, Alex appeared in the underground cavern battlefield and killed Borg forcefully. Right after that, a golden dragon and a frost dragon descended with hundreds of mysterious powerhouses, and defeated the army of the Wind Forest. And, we seem to have forgotten one thing. Alex has his own name. Meg Alex. This is his full name, Roland said in a low voice as he looked into Michael's eyes. The secret chamber suddenly became quiet, and only the light from the oil lamp flickered slightly. "Are you sure?" Michael's voice was a little hoarse. He suddenly felt that his throat was a little dry. If Amy is the daughter of Meg and Irina, this can also explain why the elves worked together with the demons and the Magus Tower to kill Alex back then. The Elven Queen would never allow herself to be pregnant with a human's child. Alex changed his face and became the chef Meg in Chaos City. Everything can be explained. But, how did Alex become Mr. Mac? It's already a miracle that he was able to recover from his terrible injuries back then. Isn't it the biggest flaw in this deduction to be able to achieve such superb culinary skills in just 3 years? Michael shook his head in disbelief. Since he's Alex, what's impossible? Roland asked. Michael choked, and was actually speechless. The secret chamber fell into silence again. Then, what should we do now? Inform the world, or lay our cards on the table with him directly? Michael asked. Although he didn't get Meg to admit it personally, just like what Roland said, this possibility was already close to the truth. Neither of these 2 choices will do us any good. Roland shook his head with a smile, and said, since Alex's philosophy is the same as ours, and he's clearly on our side, why should we lay everything out in the open? A poisonous snake hiding in the dark is easier to deal a fatal blow to the enemy. What we should do now is to help him hide better, and help him cover up the traces that he's exposed. That's a good idea. Michael nodded with a smile. Chapter 1281. That night, the Norland continent was destined to be chaotic. A young thief was locked up in the 18th floor of the Bowtie prison because he said something he shouldn't. No one was allowed to come in contact with him. The Wind Forest fell into chaos because of Borg's death. Borg had left behind a huge foundation. Without a leader, how were the families in Borg's faction going to deal with themselves? Meanwhile, the elves at the bottom had some new ideas because of the miraculous victory of the Night Elves. The idea of fighting for freedom for the rest of their lives started to spread in the chaos. It was as if there was a mysterious force pushing it, and it started to spread like wildfire. Sally, the High Priest, asked me to take over Borg's position as the commander of the elves. The chance for the Brewster family to rise is here. Elliot walked around the room excitedly. He looked at Sally and said, "Soon, we will be able to replicate the glory of the Borg family and become the #1 family in the Wind Forest. And then be killed like Borg, and the whole family will be divided by those fellows who supported him in the past," Sally said with a cold expression. She looked at Elliot with disappointment. Elliot's expression froze, but he quickly turned to Sally with a smile, and said, "How can that be? I am different from Borg. He wants to be the king of the Wind Forest, but I don't. You will become the new princess of the Wind Forest soon. Then, you will be the king of the Wind Forest, and our Brewster family will become the new royalty of the Wind Forest." Sally pursed her lips, and shook her head. "Father, Princess Irina is not dead, and so is Alex. Furthermore, they have the support of a powerful force that is not weaker than the elves. This huge defeat has made the elves start to reflect on freedom and resistance. The false prosperity of the Wind Forest can't last much longer. Do you want to sink deeper and deeper?" "No, that's impossible," Elliot shouted with a little fanaticism. "The Wind Forest will never lose. When have those slaves ever really obeyed us? But in the face of great power and the whip, how would they dare to resist? When you become the queen of the elves, I will still be the marshal of the elves. The Wind Forest and the Brewster family will gain great prosperity and glory. What if I don't support you?" Sally pouted. Elliot was stunned. He looked at Sally and raised his voice. "What did you say? What if I want those low-level elves to regain their freedom after I become the queen?" Sally looked into Elliot's eyes and asked without averting her gaze. "Paw!" A crisp sound of a slap was heard. Sally covered her face and took 2 steps back. She looked at Elliot in disbelief. The father who had doted on her since she was young actually hit her. "How dare you say such a thing? Do you know how much I've sacrificed for the glory of the Brewster family? I've forced Irina to leave, and I've forced Borg to his death. Everything is going to succeed, and the Brewster family is going to become the most glorious family in the Wind Forest. You want me to give up?" Elliot roared at Sally. Sally's eyes turned red when she saw Elliot's ferocious and crazy expression. This man was no longer the father who doted on her in every way. Profit and power had twisted him. Elliot looked at Sally, who was silent with her red eyes. He seemed to suddenly realize that his behavior was inappropriate. He quickly put down his hand and squeezed out a smile. "Sally, I didn't hit you, did I? I didn't do it on purpose. I was just anxious and didn't control my emotions well. You know that I did this for you and for the family." Sally dodged Elliot's hand and shook her head slightly. "I'm fine. I'm going to rest." She then turned and walked out of the door. "How could I hit Sally?" Elliot looked at Sally walking out of the door. He slapped his hand that was frozen in the air with self-reproach. However, a fanatical smile soon appeared on his face, and he began to pace around the room again as he murmured to himself, "Once I take back my military power, Sally will ascend to the throne, and I'll be the true king of the wind forest. I'll do what Borg failed to do. The next morning, it wasn't the alarm clock that woke Meg up. Instead, it was two bell-like giggles. Meg, who was lying on the mattress on the floor, opened his eyes and saw two smiling faces lying on the side of the bed. One of them was big and the other was small. Their bright smiles were like a spring breeze. He couldn't help but giggle foolishly. "Father, your eyes look like a cat's." Amy drew a line along Meg's eyes with her finger. There was still some black carbon powder on her finger. "I think the mustache looks pretty good," Irina said with a smile. She covered her mouth with her hand and drew a mustache on her upper lip. "TSK, TSK. How can you bully the person with the lowest status in the family so early in the morning? How can you do that?" Meg sat up and looked at the two of them helplessly. Although he was complaining, he couldn't stop smiling. Meg picked up Amy and rubbed his face against Amy's. He looked at her face, which had turned half black, and said with a smile, "Now Amy has become a little black egg too." "Wow, that's great." Amy giggled. Then, she looked at Irina. "Then, only Mother's face is clean now." "No, no, I refuse." Irina rejected with a serious expression. However, Meg and Amy had already pounced on her. 10 minutes later, the three of them sitting on the messy little bed looked at each other's faces that had turned into big black cats and laughed at the same time. Ugly Duckling, who was sleeping at the end of the bed, opened its eyes in a daze when it heard the laughter. It jumped up from the bed with a meow and shrunk against the door, looking at the three of them in horror. "All right, go brush your teeth and wash your face. We're going back to business today." Meg picked up Amy and walked to the bathroom with a smile. He didn't understand why he would play such a childish game, and why he was so immersed in it. Life seems to have become more interesting. Irina looked at Meg and Amy's backs with a smile. "This is the toothpaste, and this is the toothbrush. Squeeze the toothpaste on the toothbrush, and then brush your teeth up and down like this." Meg taught Irina how to use the toothbrush step by step. The family of three stood in front of the sink. Amy moved a little stool and stood in the middle, while Meg and Irina stood on either side. They looked at the synchronized movements in the mirror with smiles in their eyes. After putting on her favorite purple dress, Amy looked at Irina and Meg, and said, "Father, Mother, I found out that I have superpowers today." "What?" Irina asked with a smile. "I like you guys so much." Chapter 1282. Meg and Irina looked at each other and smiled. The little girl's mouth was really sweet. "Have you learned it?" Irina asked Meg with a smile. "I think you're a little strange today." Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. "What's wrong?" Irina touched her hair. Could it be that her hairstyle was messy? "You're quite cute." Meg smiled. Irina was slightly taken aback, and then she couldn't help but laugh. She looked at Meg with sparkling eyes. He was a fast learner. "What about me, what about me? Father, am I cute?" Amy came up and pouted. She placed her little fists on both sides of her face and asked while blinking her big eyes. "Yes, Amy is super cute too." Meg smiled and scratched Amy's nose. "Then how should I tie my hair today?" "I want to tie my hair into a big bun again." Amy let Meg help her put on her shoes, and then she looked at Irina. "Mother, can you help Amy?" "Of course." Irina nodded. She didn't expect Amy to like her hair so much. It seemed that her hair tying skills weren't as bad as she had thought. Amy has to go to school today. I think maybe we can tie a little low-key bun. Recently, the school has been looking for strange outfits. Why don't I do it today? Meg said weakly. The bird nest-like bun from yesterday left a deep impression on him. If she went to school with such a hairstyle, she would definitely be the center of attention. It was better to keep a low profile. Is that so? Irina was a little disappointed upon hearing that. Yes. Meg nodded. Seeing that Irina wasn't too happy, he said, but Amy will be studying at Master Julian's place tomorrow. It's just next door, and there won't be anyone else. Okay, then I'll tie Amy's hair tomorrow. Irina's eyes lit up and she nodded. Then from now on, father and mother will do the same every day. That's great, Amy said happily. Meg carried Amy to the dressing table, took a wooden comb, and combed her hair neatly. He then picked up a rubber band from the box, and with a few nimble twirls of his fingers, he tied up a delicate and cute little bun. So fast. Also, it's so cute. Irina looked at Amy's hair, which had been tied up in the blink of an eye. It really looked like a small meatball, delicate and cute, and not messy at all. It was more than 100 times prettier than the big meatball she had used magic to style yesterday. Most importantly, Meg was so skilled that before she could even learn how to use her eyes, he had already tied up Amy's hair. Do you want to learn? Meg turned around and smiled at Irina. I don't want to. Irina turned her head and said proudly. Then let's go downstairs. I'm going to make breakfast for the cleaners. Meg looked at the time. It was already 6:00. Mother, why don't you let father tie up your hair for you? Amy walked beside Irina and stroked her long hair. Because some people only want to tie it up for you and don't even think about me. Irina looked at Meg's back and pursed her lips. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. He had already sensed the jealousy that was gradually spreading behind him, and he suddenly felt a little wronged. He just felt that Irina's hair was so smooth and unique, and it looked more elegant with it draped over her shoulders. She didn't need any hair accessories or styling at all. Meg went downstairs, and Phyllis was already waiting outside the door. Princess, did you have a good rest last night? Phyllis asked with concern as she entered the dining room and looked at Irina. The princess was very familiar with the bed. If she wasn't familiar with the environment, she would often not be able to sleep well. I slept quite well. Irina nodded. The big, soft bed, the quilt with a faint floral fragrance, and the little cutie in her arms. She slept very well last night, and all her fatigue during this period was swept away. Phyllis looked at Irina's perfect complexion. She didn't look like she didn't have a good rest, so she was relieved. I'm going out after breakfast, Irina said casually as she took a sip of the warm water that Meg had poured for her. Is something the matter? Meg looked up and asked. I'll go with you, Phyllis said at the same time. Phyllis looked at Meg, then at Irina. Wasn't the princess talking to her? I'm going to find a place to set up the night elf's base. Bean Sprout, you don't have to go with me. Learn how to cook from him. You will be the head chef of the night elves in the future. Food is the main selling point of the night elves' recruitment. Meg nodded and then said to Phyrus, Bean Sprout, you don't have to go with me. Head chef. Phyllis opened her mouth slightly. She suddenly felt a heavy burden on her shoulders. However, this was the princess' trust in her, so she had to work hard. She nodded seriously and said, I will work hard. The night elves had moved their base to Chaos City with the intention of amassing power here before waiting for an opportunity to counterattack the Wind Forest. Irina had told him about it yesterday. They really had to look for a place to settle down for over 1,000 people. Why don't I go with you after the restaurant closes? I'm more familiar with Chaos City, Meg said to Irina. It just so happens that I don't have any money with me. Irina nodded without hesitation. Boss, I will try my best to return the money needed to rent a place, Phyllis said hurriedly. She was a little worried that Mag would take this to heart and treat the princess as a scoundrel. Meg and Irina glanced at Phyllis at the same time with weird expressions. Although my salary is very low now, I will work hard, Phyllis said even more firmly as the two of them stared at her. They couldn't let the princess work, right? Let's talk about this in the future. I'm also willing to do my part for the night elves, Meg consoled. Boss, you're the best. Phyllis looked at Meg, touched. She didn't expect her boss to be willing to do so much for the night elves for her. She didn't know how to repay him. It's all right, it's all right. I'll go and cook first. Meg walked to the kitchen with embarrassment. The money he earned was for his wife. Did he have to write an IOU? Since Phyllis is back, does that mean I don't have to come to work anymore? I don't think I'm needed anymore, right? Camilla asked Mag after she arrived at the restaurant and glanced at Phyrus, who was slicing all the ingredients perfectly with her wind blades. We signed a 1-year contract. Because of the addition of the hot pot, the amount of ingredients used has also doubled. Now that Phyllis is back, your workload will be reduced by a lot. So, you'd better stay. Meg shook his head at Camilla. What a joke. The restaurant was lacking manpower now. How could he let go of such a labor force so easily? Chapter 1283. Yes. Didn't you tie the rope well? Irina smiled at Camilla. Camilla's expression froze. She glanced at Irina and tried to avoid her gaze. However, she was already roaring in her heart. Why is she still here today? Is she living in the restaurant? I'm sorry, Madam Camilla. I haven't cut vegetables in the restaurant for a long time, and my hands were itchy, so I didn't notice that I was taking up so much space. Like before, this half of the cutting table is yours. Phyllis also noticed Camilla's arrival, and stepped aside to give up half of the space with a smile. Camilla looked at Meg with resentment. If not for the fact that the photo stone was in his hands, she would never give in so easily. After the morning service, Meg changed his attire, and went out with Irina. Is there a need to do this? Irina looked at the veil that was covering her face with a slight frown. After all, we are building a base. It's better to keep a low profile. Otherwise, it would seem too unprofessional. Meg pressed on his beard that was about to fall off. He waved his hand to hail a horse-drawn carriage, and asked it to take them to the rental company. The rental company was also this world's real estate agent. The equal and stable environment created many forward-looking industries in Chaos City. It was really impossible to find such a well-stocked real estate agent in other places. The moment Mag and Irina stepped through the door, the beautiful and flirtatious succubus came up to them with a smile. She glanced at Mag and immediately smilingly said, Sir, Madam, please come in. May I know if you're here for the rental business or for the rental business? Of course, if you want to buy real estate, we also have a lot of real estate to choose from. Meg went straight to the point. We are looking for a big factory, and we intend to set up a large-scale workshop. If there is a suitable property, we intend to rent it for a long time, or buy it directly. Miss Succubus's eyes lit up. This was a big deal. If she could sell a factory, she could buy another house in the city this month. She looked at Meg with a more gentle gaze. She didn't expect this young man to be a rich customer. Meg looked at Miss Succubus's perverted eyes and felt the coldness coming from beside him. He immediately took half a step back and pointed at Irina. This is my boss. The succubus froze for a moment before apologizing awkwardly. Sorry, madam. I thought you were. Please forgive my recklessness and ignorance. It's okay. Let's look at the house. Irina said coldly. She glanced at Meg with a smile. The feeling of being a boss was pretty good. Meg heaved a sigh of relief. As a qualified man, he had to be sensitive to the emotional changes of the woman beside him. Otherwise, he would be confused no matter how he made her angry. Miss Succubus glanced at Meg resentfully, and quickly led Irina to the VIP area. Please wait for a moment. I will go and get the housing information for you. Miss Succubus brought the two of them to an independent VIP box and said respectfully. Then, she turned around and left. Isn't it a place to stay? Why do we have to choose a factory? Only Meg and Irina were left in the room, and Irina was perplexed. There are over 1,000 night elves, and we can't fit all of them in a normal house. Furthermore, we don't know when we will be able to launch a counterattack. We have nothing to do in Chaos City, so we might as well find something for them to do, and subsidize the night elves' military expenses. Meg smiled. He thought of this on his way here, and he had already thought of the specific business project. Irina thought for a while, and felt that what Meg said made sense, so she nodded. Sorry to keep you waiting. Miss Succubus came over with 2 huge housing information books, and another Miss Succubus poured a cup of tea for Meg and Irina. Although that Miss Succubus had boasted about all the housing information, Meg didn't listen to her recommendation to buy a factory in the south of the city. Instead, he suggested that Irina buy a remote factory in the north of the city. Madam, are you sure you want to buy this factory? Although this factory is bigger, this area is still not mature, and there aren't many factories and residential areas nearby. I'm afraid it will be a problem to recruit workers, Miss Succubus said sincerely. The total price of this factory was only 5 million copper coins, and a factory of the same size in the south of the city would cost at least twice as much. I want this one. Irina shook her head, and turned to look at Meg. Pay up. All right, boss. Meg nodded while holding back his laughter. This boss's style was really impressive. Don't you want to go and take a look at the factory? Miss Succubus asked. No need. Let's just buy it. Irina shook her head slightly. Miss Succubus saw that Irina had no intention to consider further, so she could only say to Meg, this way please. Meg nodded slightly, and followed that Miss Succubus downstairs to pay. Chaos City's property registration was very standard, but the agent had channels, so the property registration was completed in just one morning. This factory was now under Irina's name. Didn't you say you wanted to keep it a secret? Then why did you write my name on the property certificate? Irina looked at Meg perplexedly after they walked out of the agent's door. Anyway, there are so many elves gathered together, so I couldn't hide it even if I wanted to. It didn't matter whose name I wrote. Meg shrugged. It should be that all the high-level forces on the Norland continent knew that the Night Elves were preparing to retreat to Chaos City. That's true. Irina nodded, and then looked at Meg speechlessly. Then, why am I still wearing this lousy hat? Isn't it to appear more professional? Meg helped her put on the veil hat before flagging down a horse-drawn carriage to the north of the city. They still had to take a look at the factory. Otherwise, the Night Elves wouldn't have a place to sleep when they arrived. Seems like that Miss Succubus was right. This place is indeed a little desolate. Meg couldn't help but raise his eyebrows as he looked at the huge factory standing in the wilderness. He didn't expect there to be such a desolate place in Chaos City. The place that wasn't covered by snow was filled with weeds. This place has been abandoned for 2 to 3 years. What are you guys doing here? The coachman asked, perplexed. From today onwards, it belongs to us. Meg smiled. He asked the coachman to go closer to the factory, and asked him to wait outside for a while. He then brought Irina to open the big lock on the door, pushed open the dusty door, and walked in. The interior of the factory wasn't as bad as Meg had imagined. Although there was a thick layer of dust on the ground, there weren't too many miscellaneous items. There were a few holes in the roof, but the overall structure was still very well preserved. They only needed to do some repairs, and didn't need to demolish and rebuild it completely. Chapter 1284. In this factory, other than the 5 large 2-story workshops, there were 2 staff dormitories and a large empty space at the back. If they built another 2 staff dormitories, they would be able to satisfy the needs of the night elves. Not bad, much better than the catacombs. Irina walked around the factory and nodded in satisfaction. All right, I'll get some craftsmen to repair it later. Meg was also quite satisfied. He was originally worried that the noise from the machines would disturb the residents, but from the looks of it, there was no need to worry about this at all with the location of this factory. As for recruitment, they brought their own staff, so there was no need to worry about this problem. But, what do you plan to let them do? Irina looked around and asked Meg. Why don't they do textiles? This factory is just right. Textiles. Irina frowned slightly. You'll know when the time comes. Meg said with a smile and looked at the factory again. Let's go. Otherwise, we won't be able to make it in time for the lunch service. Right, I'm interviewing new staff at noon. Do you want to participate? Interview. It's to test if those who signed up are suitable to be the restaurant staff. Sounds quite interesting. I'm the restaurant's lady boss, so I should participate, right? Waitress recruitment. Interview this afternoon. The list is as follows. The customers queuing at noon noticed the notice posted at the restaurant's entrance. There were 2 long lists of names written on it. Great, I'm on the list. Oh my God, I'm not on it. Uncle, isn't it too much for you to fake your gender? What do you know? My beauty is not something that ordinary people can appreciate. The customers looked at the list. Some were surprised, and some lamented. Reina. It can't really be her, right? Shan looked at the familiar name on the list and could not help but feel surprised. She had planned to ask Reina to come over for lunch this afternoon, but she was unfortunately kept by the boss to rush with work. She probably did not even have time for lunch. Reina, I brought you a biscuit. Eat something first before you continue cooking. Shan returned to the company and placed the biscuit she bought from the street beside Reina, who was immersed in calculations, and said, Yes, thank you. Reina answered without raising her head. She quickly filled in the amount she had just calculated on the bill. It took her half an hour to calculate it. Shan sat down and asked curiously, By the way, I went to Mamie's for dinner just now and saw the interview list pasted on the door. There was someone with the same name as you on it. You didn't really sign up, did you? Whoosh. Reina's quill scratched the bill, but she didn't care. Instead, she looked up at Shan and said in surprise, Really? Can I really go for the interview? It really is you. Shan was also surprised, but she quickly nodded and said, I did see your name. The announcement said that the interview will start this afternoon. It's 1:30 now, so it should have started already. No, I have to go for the interview. Reina stood up and walked towards the door. But Reina, didn't the boss just ask you to give her the bill today? Shan looked at the thick ledger beside Reina's hand and reminded her worriedly. Reina's footsteps suddenly froze. She looked back at the ledger and remembered the boss's warning. If she didn't complete the tasks today, she would be fired. Her eyes were full of confusion. She didn't have much confidence in her success in the interview. Compared to the beautiful ladies at Mamie's, she looked a little shabby. If she didn't succeed in the interview, she would be fired from her current job. Then she wouldn't have the money to buy medicine for her mother. Thinking of this, Reina suddenly lost the courage to take another step forward. Shan Shan looked at Reina with some pity in her eyes. Her family had shares in this company. She came to work because she was bored at home. The boss usually treated her well, but Reina was oppressed. She also knew that Reina loved cooking. If she could work at Mamie's, she would definitely live a happier life. Reina, give me half of the ledger. We'll try to finish it before the end of the day. Then you can go for the interview. Maybe you can make it in time, Shan Shan said to Reina. This. Reina looked at Shan Shan with a hint of hesitation. Although I don't want you to leave, if you become an employee at Mamie's, it will be a wonderful thing. Maybe you can even give me an extra helping of tofu pudding. Shan Shan got up and took half of Reina's ledger. Then she returned to her seat and sat down. Let's start. We can do it. Thank you, Shan Shan. Reina's eyes reddened. She quickly returned to her seat and picked up the quill again. After the lunch service ended, Meg began the first official interview for Mamie's recruitment after a short break. The interviewers for this interview were very luxurious. There was the #1 knight of the Norland continent, Alex, the former elven princess and leader of the night elves, Irina, frost dragon princesses Elizabeth and Yabamia, Moon Nation's princess, Barbara, Lantist's princess, Gina, Fog Tribe's princess, Connie, crossed out, Countess Bartoli's wife, Camilla, also crossed out, and so on. Such a lineup was actually just to recruit 1 or 2 new employees for the restaurant. A few tables were arranged in an arc. There was a chair in the middle of the arc. That was the interviewee's seat. Meanwhile, there were all kinds of props on the shelf at the side. Those were props to test the interviewee's ability. Ability was what Meg valued the most. Meg, who was sitting in the middle, looked at the princesses around him. He didn't know why they were all princesses. Could it be that he was attracted to princesses? Irina sat next to Meg, and was also near the center. Although the ladies didn't understand why Princess Irina was suddenly so interested in the restaurant's recruitment, her status and ability were there, after all. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with her sitting in the middle. Meanwhile, the ladies were all curious. It was their first time interviewing an interviewee. Can I recruit a big sister that I like? Connie asked eagerly. No, you can't. Meg glanced at Connie, and said calmly. Birds of a feather flock together. If he recruited another dimwit, he would be worried about whether the restaurant could continue to operate. Sigh, newbies have no human rights. Connie said softly as she slumped on the table dejectedly. It's almost time. Let the first interviewee in. Meg glanced at the time, and picked up the information on the table. The first interviewee was called Hannah, a young succubus. Chapter 1285. The ladies who came for the interview at noon had already formed a long line at the restaurant's entrance. There were a total of 50 people on the interview list, and they would be interviewed according to the order of their names on the list. Most of the ladies had exquisite makeup on as they stood there nervously. There were many noble ladies who were dressed extravagantly, which made many passers-by click their tongues in amazement. There was only one restaurant in Chaos City where noble ladies were lining up to be waitresses, and that was Mamie's. First interviewee, Miss Hannah. Please come in, Anna read out as she walked to the door with the name list. A tall succubus lady walked out from the line, and unbuttoned her coat as she walked. When she reached the restaurant's entrance, she took off the coat that was wrapped around her, and only wore a black tight-fitting suit that showed off her voluptuous figure perfectly. Wow, that figure is so good. I'm so jealous. Humph. She just wants to sell her body. Scheming bitch. Wrap my tummy tightly. The ladies waiting for the interview all looked at Hannah, and began to whisper among themselves. "Little cutie, can you help me hold it?" the succubus Hannah asked Anna with a smile. "All right." Anna reached out and hugged that huge dress, which almost drowned her whole body. "Thank you," Hannah said with a smile. She took a deep breath, and then pushed open the door confidently and walked in. Ding! The bell rang, and Meg and the rest all looked up at the door. A succubus in a black tight-fitting suit walked in. Her wavy red hair was wild, and her curvy figure was perfectly displayed in the black tight-fitting suit. Her pair of phoenix eyes stared at Meg, who was sitting in the middle, and threw him a flirtatious glance. Sexy. That was everyone's first impression of this succubus lady. Even if she did nothing and just stood there, she still had a magical charm that made people want to take a second look at her. Of course, other than the fact that she was indeed beautiful and sexy, as a succubus, they had the gift of seduction. Meg frowned slightly as he looked at that succubus lady who was looking at him with sparkling eyes. She had obviously used her gift of seduction on him, and that made him a little unhappy. Succubi were natural salespeople. As long as they could unleash their charm freely, they could easily defeat 99% of the ordinary people in this industry. However, Mamie's didn't need salespeople, and now it didn't need a waitress who could seduce the boss. Did he have the guts to do something? No. Irina, on the other hand, was looking at Mag and that succubus with a smile. This little succubus was quite daring to seduce her man in front of her. Oh. It's so big. Phyllis looked at Hannah and then lowered her head to look at herself, feeling a little depressed. Hannah's seduction. Okay. Hannah looked at Meg's bright eyes, and a hint of surprise appeared in her eyes. Mr. Mac didn't respond to her charm at all. Even though she was only a third-tier succubus, even a seventh-tier knight would be tempted by her seduction spell, but it didn't work on Mag. Although she was surprised, Hannah still calmly sat down on the chair. Looking at the people in the semicircle facing her from all directions, she still felt a little nervous. When did the interview become like this? Shouldn't I just talk to the boss alone? Hannah muttered in her heart. She liked to eat the food at Mamie's, but her current job only allowed her to eat at Mamie's twice a week, and she couldn't eat expensive food. This was too cruel for a succubus who liked to eat. So when she saw the restaurant's recruitment notice, she immediately signed up. She was full of confidence that she could be hired. Although she wasn't familiar with the food and beverage industry, she knew men like the back of her hand. She was born to charm men. Coincidentally, the boss of Mamie's was a man, and a bachelor at that. If possible, she wouldn't mind becoming the lady boss of Mamie's. In that case, she should be able to eat a second helping of tofu pudding, right? Although she was facing beautiful girls, Hannah quickly re-established her confidence. Beauty alone might not be able to win over men. Otherwise, Mamie's would have had a lady boss long ago. Obviously, these beautiful girls were a little uneasy. "Miss Hannah, can you introduce yourself first?" Meg looked at Hannah and said. The information was very limited, and he didn't want to brush off an interviewee directly based on the first impression. Hannah looked at Meg and smiled. "Hello, boss. I'm Hannah, 20 years old this year. I'm a level 3 succubus. I've been in the construction material sales industry for 3 years. I'm a sales champion. In this industry, excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt." Meg raised his hand to signal Hannah to stop, and then said, "Because there are more people interviewing today, you can skip the specific details of your previous work and your growth history as much as possible. Just talk about your specialty and what you can do in our restaurant. In this restaurant, you're qualified for any job." Hannah, who was interrupted, pondered for a while, then smiled at Meg and said, "I think I'm qualified for the job of receiving customers. This is also an important part of my current job. Also, if boss needs to do anything in your daily life, you can let me do it. If there's something, Hannah will do it. If there's nothing, Hannah will do it. If there's nothing, Hannah will do it. If there's nothing, Hannah will do it. Hannah gave Meg a knowing look. Meg looked down, indicating that he didn't know anything. The girls nodded slightly. Looking at Hannah, they all felt that she could do the task of receiving customers well. The customers would probably like such an employee. If there's nothing, Hannah. She's really a model of a good employee. Irina curled her lips and said with slight mockery, "Comrade, your idea is very dangerous." Hannah's expression stiffened, and she looked at Irina. This was an extremely beautiful elf. Her noble temperament made her feel a little ashamed, and she subconsciously restrained her charm. But who was this beautiful elf? I didn't see her when I was eating in the restaurant. Was she a new waitress? Or was she the boss's wife who had never shown up? I didn't mean that. I just feel that I can take care of the boss's life while doing a good job in the restaurant. I think this is what I should do as a restaurant employee. Chapter 1286. Actually, you're here to apply for the lady boss position, right? Irina looked at Hannah with a smile. Meg glanced at Irina. He felt that there was a knife hidden in that smile. Hannah choked. Although that was indeed what she was thinking, she didn't expect Mag to see through her. She glanced at Mag and meekly said, "I just want to find a job that I like." "All right, Miss Hannah. We have understood your situation. We will consider whether to hire you. The specific notice will be posted tomorrow afternoon. You can pay attention to it." Meg smiled. In order to ensure the safety of this succubus, he felt that it was better to end this interview as soon as possible. "All right." Hannah got up and left. Under that elf's gaze, she felt that she had been completely seen through. It was a terrible feeling. When Hannah left the restaurant, the cold wind blew and she couldn't help but shiver. "Sister, your clothes." Anna handed the clothes she was holding to Hannah. "Thank you." Hannah took the clothes and put them on. A confident smile appeared on her face again. She swayed her beautiful waist and left as if she had been successfully hired. Next. Anna took out the name list and called for the next interviewee. "Hey, uncle, your powder isn't even evenly applied. You didn't shave your beard clean, and a corner of your mantle is showing. Don't you think it's a bit too much to dress up like this to deceive people?" Mag couldn't help grumbling as he looked at the crossdresser, who had a thick layer of white powder on his face and 2 exaggerated false eyelashes, and was speaking in a hoarse falsetto while pinching his throat. He glanced at Shirley, who was standing at the side. This was the perfect example of a crossdresser. It was enough to pass off as the real deal. "Did you glue your eyelashes with donkey hair?" Irina asked curiously. You're bullying me." "Boo-hoo." The uncle covered his face and ran away. Next, Meg said calmly, "Are you sure you didn't fill in the wrong information?" Meg glanced at the information that stated her height was 165 centimeters and weight was 85 centimeters. Then, he looked at the fat girl who was sitting on the chair like a little meat bun and asked with uncertainty. Maybe one of the weights overlapped with the grid. "You didn't look carefully," the girl said weakly. Mag took a closer look, and indeed, he could vaguely see a vertical handwriting on the weight column. It was deliberate. He couldn't help but chuckle. "You're such a clever little brat. Although I don't look that slender, I'm only 18 years old. I'm at the age where I'm like a flower, blooming with youth and beauty. Look, don't I look like a flower?" The fat girl used her 2 chubby hands to support her chin and shook her head left and right. "Is it meaty?" Irina asked. The girl's expression suddenly froze. Although it was meaty and cute, but it was still too square. The restaurant suddenly quieted down, and all the women turned their faces away, trying hard not to laugh. The boss and Princess Irina's comments were so sharp that they couldn't get a word in edgewise. Miss, Mamie's work intensity is very high. It might not be suitable for you right now. Meg also tried to hold back his laughter. Being fat wasn't a big problem, but Meg didn't like the fact that she was deliberately misleading the information. Moreover, from the way she was panting after taking a few steps, it was obvious that her physical fitness couldn't keep up with the intensity of work in the restaurant. Therefore, her name was removed from the list. Next, Vanessa. Meg looked at the familiar name and was slightly surprised. Wasn't this Princess Vanessa's fake name? Why did she sign up? This list was selected by Anna according to his requirements. He was too busy yesterday and didn't pay attention to it, so he didn't notice that Princess Vanessa had also signed up. Mamie's was full of princesses now, but most of them were princesses who had fallen on hard times and were kindly taken in by him. However, this princess of the Roth Empire was different. This princess was deeply doted on by the king. If he knew that Vanessa was working as a waitress at Mamie's, he would probably investigate the restaurant thoroughly. Meg was still thinking about it when the restaurant's door was pushed open, and Vanessa walked in. The door closed slowly, and Laura's anxious face was also shut out. Hello, I am Vanessa. Vanessa lifted the hem of her dress elegantly and bowed slightly. Her hand, which was grabbing the hem of her dress, was a little pale because she was using too much force. She had only read about interviews in books, and had never thought that she would face one day. It was as if there were countless deer running around in her heart, and she was extremely nervous. She looked up, and her gaze fell on Irina. She was slightly taken aback, and after blinking to make sure that she wasn't seeing things, she covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Big sister Irina. Isn't this little Sasha? Why are you here?" Irina looked at Vanessa with a hint of surprise. This little girl used to come and play with her every time she went to Rodu, and she had watched her grow up. She didn't expect to meet her in Chaos City. Vanessa was a little hesitant. She didn't want to expose her identity, but she didn't know how to lie. Lying was really not her forte. Irina seemed to have seen through Vanessa's thoughts, and waved a hand casually as she said, "It's all right. It's not shameful to be kicked out because of your ugliness." Vanessa nodded, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Only big sister Irina could come up with such a reason. However, when she saw Irina sitting next to Mag, she couldn't help but curiously ask, "Then, why are you here, big sister Irina?" "I'm here to eat, and also to join in the fun," Irina replied casually. "I see." Vanessa nodded with an enlightened expression. She didn't suspect anything at all. "You believe her just like that?" Meg raised an eyebrow. He was still thinking about how to explain Irina's presence here. Miss Vanessa, are you here to apply for a waitress position?" Meg picked up the information and skimmed through it. Vanessa's qualifications did meet all the requirements that Meg had previously mentioned, so he had nothing to say about her being chosen by Anna. However, he didn't dare to keep her if she dared to enter the restaurant. "Yes, Mr. Mack. I like Mamie's, and I also want to become a member of Mamie's. I think it will be a very interesting experience." Vanessa nodded seriously. Her eyes were sparkling. She had come for the interview without telling Uncle Abraham today. Mag murmured as he looked at Vanessa's sparkling eyes. He didn't know what reason he should use to reject this princess who was so passionate about her work. "Carry this stack of plates and walk around the restaurant 10 times. Irina pointed at a stack of plates on the table next to them. There were about 15 plates on the table, and there were bowls and plates of all kinds. It was more in line with the number of plates that a table could take in during business hours. Okay. Vanessa stepped forward excitedly and reached out to pick up the plate. It's so heavy. Although the tray was lifted up, the heaviness made Vanessa feel as if her arm was about to be torn off. She forced herself to walk forward, and every step was extremely difficult. She had only taken about 10 steps when she lost her balance, and the stacked plates fell to the ground with a crash. No pop-up window. Chapter 1287. With a series of clattering sounds, the plates and bowls shattered all over the floor. Vanessa hugged the last big plate on the tray in a flurry. She looked at the broken pieces of porcelain on the floor and swallowed her saliva. She looked back at everyone and said apologetically, "I'll pay for this." Meg shook his head and looked at Vanessa. "That's fine. But plates of this weight will need to be moved about 100 times a day. There can't be any mistakes. Do you think you can do it? 100 times?" Vanessa was speechless. She felt like her arms were about to break after taking a few steps with such heavy plates. Her arms were still sore and weak. If she had to carry so many plates to and fro in the restaurant 100 times, she wouldn't be able to do it even if she was killed. "I definitely can't do it." Vanessa shook her head, and then looked at Yabamiya and the rest with admiration. These ladies were so impressive. Usually, they looked so relaxed at work, and could even look beautiful. She didn't expect the things they were doing to be so tough. "It's fine. It's good to realize your own shortcomings. Big sister will treat you to hot pot tonight." Irina looked at Vanessa with a smile. "Really?" Vanessa's eyes lit up and she immediately nodded happily. Okay. Vanessa and Irina agreed to eat hot pot together and then left happily. Meg heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Irina with admiration. Her move of retreating in the face of difficulties was really brilliant. The next few interviewees were more average. There were a few girls who had experience working in restaurants. Meg added a star. It was easier for those with experience to get the hang of the job. They also had expectations of the work intensity and wouldn't leave after a few days of hard work. However, Meg didn't hire them directly. Instead, he told them to look at the announcement tomorrow so that they wouldn't miss out on more suitable candidates. The next interviewee is Reina. Reina didn't come. Uncle Meg, the interviewee Reina didn't come for the interview. Anna walked in and looked at Meg. "Okay, then let's skip to the next one." Meg nodded and put Reina's information aside. She was the first interviewee to give up on her own accord today. "Okay." Anna responded and went out to call the next interviewee. Still no one was hired directly. It's so strict. There were a few young ladies who weren't hired even though they were so pretty. I'm a little scared. Did Mr. Mack do something to them? The interviewees were the interviewees of the interviewees. Before the new interviewee arrived, Yabamiya yawned, and asked Mag, "Boss, the interviews are almost over. Don't you have anyone in mind yet?" "Of the interviewee. But. Let's see all the interviewees first. So far, I don't think there's anyone who can get the job." Meg shook his head with a smile. Maybe he was being too demanding, but the waitresses were an important part of the restaurant. It was only right to be serious. The interview continued. Meg and Irina still maintained a serious attitude. "Uncle Meg, we've interviewed all the interviewees on the list," Anna said as she walked in. "Okay. Thank you for your hard work this afternoon." Meg folded the information neatly into 2 stacks. He had to think carefully about which one to choose from among the few girls who were on his shortlist. Phyllis and Shirley's return alleviated the lack of waitresses in the restaurant. One more waitress would be enough. If there were more, it would seem like there were people standing everywhere. Ding-ling. Just then, the bell rang outside the door. Everyone looked up in surprise. Wasn't the interview over? Anna tiptoed and pushed open the door. A girl was standing at the door, sweating profusely. She held the door with one hand and panted heavily. I'm Reina. May I know if has the interview ended? Yes, it just ended. Meg nodded as he looked at this thin and frail maiden. She had a head of slightly curly flaxen hair and a delicate face. It seemed like she had run all the way here. The name Reina sounded familiar. He lowered his head and looked at the information he had singled out. It was the interviewee who didn't come. Reina stood up straight and tried to calm her breathing. She looked at Meg sincerely and said, Can you give me a chance? Meg looked at Reina and nodded slightly. You're the 21st interviewee. The interview time has passed. But if your reason for being late is good enough, I don't mind giving you a chance to interview. I was working just now. Although it's a job that doesn't pay much and is very tedious, I can't lose that job before I'm sure I can become an employee of Mamie's. It's related to the survival of my mother and my life. With the help of my colleagues, I finished my work in advance and ran all the way to the restaurant. I'm very sorry for missing the interview time, Reina said apologetically. She lowered her eyes and looked depressed. Although she and Shanshan had worked very hard, there were too many accounts. They still missed the interview time. It seemed like she still didn't have the chance to become an employee of Mamie's. Everyone in the restaurant looked at Meg. This girl didn't have it easy. If only she could be given another chance. A very wise choice. Come on, Miss Reina. Let's start your interview today. Meg said with a smile. Of the 80 or so interviewees who came for the interview today, most of them wouldn't be hired. If they lost their original jobs because of an unknown interview, it wouldn't be a wise choice. Reina looked up at Meg in surprise. She couldn't believe her ears. Meg picked up Reina's information and looked at her. We'll be preparing for the evening business soon, so we don't have much time to talk. Miss Reina, please show us why we chose you to join Mamie's. Reina took a deep breath and walked a few steps forward to the chair. However, she didn't sit down. She looked at Meg and said, Can I enter your kitchen? Why? Meg asked. His kitchen wasn't open to strangers. Although I haven't eaten hot pot at Mamie's, I smelled the aroma of the red soup 2 nights ago. I can tell which spices you used, Reina said confidently. Chapter 1288. There's such a thing. Meg looked at Reina in surprise. She was confident that she could tell which spices Meg used just by smelling it a few times in the evening 2 days ago. Could it be that this girl had the legendary god's nose? Do you have a dog's nose? Irina was also surprised. After eating the hot pot yesterday, she couldn't tell anything apart from the few spices she could see. Anyway, it was delicious. Everyone in the restaurant also looked at Reina curiously. How many spices did the boss put in the hot pot? Even if they had eaten it a few times, they still couldn't tell. There may be some deviation, but I believe in my nose. Reina nodded firmly. Okay, follow me. Meg didn't beat around the bush. He immediately got up and walked to the kitchen. Reina quickly caught up with him. On the way to the kitchen, she kept taking deep breaths to adjust her heartbeat. This was her only chance. If she didn't perform well, she might have to stay in that terrible place for the rest of her life. Everyone also followed her to the kitchen. This test was much more interesting than carrying plates and mopping the floor. If Reina really succeeded, it would be amazing. Raina subconsciously stopped at the entrance of the kitchen. Looking at the bright and transparent kitchen, her eyes suddenly lit up. There was a clear division of labor, a washing table, a cutting table, and a stove. All kinds of knives and pots hung on the wall were all shining with a bright metallic luster. She almost couldn't believe that a kitchen could be like this. It was completely beyond her imagination. In her kitchen, there was only a hanging pot and a small stove made of stones. Everything in front of her was like a dream. If she could cook here, Raina's heart beat violently. She couldn't imagine that kind of happiness. Meg looked back at Raina, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen and looking at the kitchen bit by bit. Her eyes were shining with a devout light as if she was worshipping a holy place. He showed some appreciation in his eyes and didn't rush to interrupt her. Raina's eyes looked around the kitchen and finally fell on Meg. When she found that he was looking at her, she suddenly realized that she was still in the interview. Her face suddenly showed a little panic. She quickly waved her hand and said, "Oh, sorry, I just couldn't control myself for the first time seeing such a high-end kitchen. It doesn't matter. These are the spices I usually use. The spices used in the red soup hot pot are all here. Now it's your turn to perform." Meg opened the lids of the spices one by one and then stood aside. There were all kinds of spices. He used a total of 15 kinds of spices for the red soup hot pot. It was completely impossible even for people who had eaten the hot pot to accurately choose the spices he used. Otherwise, he would be too easy to imitate. Now Raina, who had only smelled the aroma, was trying to challenge his red soup hot pot recipe. He didn't think highly of it. What a complete set of spices. Raina took 2 steps forward and came to the front of the spices. She didn't flinch because of the excessive number of spices. Instead, she looked at the spices with some surprise. She had never bought spices like pepper, which was more expensive than gold. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The fragrance of all kinds of spices made her smile contentedly. If she could have the right to control these spices, it would be great. Then I'll start. Raina didn't indulge in the fragrance for too long. She turned her head and said to Meg. Then she took a plate from the side and began to put her nose close to the spices and carefully sniffed the fragrance of the spices. Although there were many spices she hadn't seen before, the smell wouldn't lie. She only needed to find the same smell as the one she smelled that day. Then, it would be the right choice. This one. And this one. Raina grabbed spices from the spices box and placed them on the plate. She wasn't fast, but she was very methodical. She sniffed row by row and occasionally paused to think for a while before choosing the spices she agreed with and placing them on the plate. Can she succeed? Anna stood on her tiptoes and looked in through the window. She muttered curiously. Maybe. Shirley lifted Anna up so that she could easily see the scene in the kitchen. Pepper, dried chili, star anise, cinnamon. Meg's eyes became brighter and brighter. So far, all the spices Raina had chosen were correct. The spices boxes were placed in a random order, so it was impossible for her to guess randomly. About 10 minutes later, Raina gently placed the plate on the stove and took 2 steps back. She looked at Meg nervously and said, "There are 2 spices that I'm not very sure about. Because the smell is weaker, and it might be covered by the smell of other spices, I didn't choose them." "Did you choose the right one?" Irina asked curiously. Everyone also looked at Meg curiously. This test was the most exciting one of the day. Choosing spices and seasonings based on smell was practically a hellish level of difficulty. The spicy hot pot has a strong flavor, so salt is essential. An appropriate amount of rock sugar can make the soup mellow and sweet, and alleviate the spiciness. Everything else is correct. Meg scooped a piece of rock sugar and a spoonful of salt onto the plate. Then, he gave Raina a thumbs up and said seriously, "You're a genius. Isn't this too awesome?" Yabamiya looked at Raina in amazement. Even now, she still couldn't learn how to make rujiamo. "That's amazing. You got almost everything right." Phyllis also looked at Raina in amazement. When she first learned how to make the sauce for roast beef kebabs, it had taken her a long time to succeed. "Why do they all smell the same to me?" Irina leaned forward and took a sniff. She looked at Raina's nose with a puzzled expression. Maybe her nose was fake. Everyone was amazed by Raina's performance. There were so many spices, and even if they were told the names, they might not be able to choose them correctly, let alone accurately choose them after smelling the soup pot once. I was just a little lucky," Raina said softly as she lowered her head shyly from everyone's compliments. "Actually, I'm more curious about one thing. Since you can decipher my recipe based on smell, why don't you open your own hot pot restaurant? Even if you have one or two fewer spices, your business won't be too bad if the price is slightly more affordable." Meg looked into Raina's eyes and asked seriously. Raina shook her head with a determined gaze, and said, "This is a delicacy that you created. It's too unfair for you to imitate it just because you know the recipe. I don't think that's what a chef should do. Actually, I don't care if others imitate it." Meg smiled and extended his hand to Raina. "But I like your answer. If you're willing, Miss Raina, welcome to Mamie's. No pop-up window." Chapter 1289. Raina looked at Meg's outstretched hand and was stunned for a while. Then, she looked at Meg in disbelief and said, You're saying that I've been hired?" "Yes, I'm very surprised by your professionalism." Meg nodded with a smile. "If you're willing, we can sign a probationary contract today. Your salary during the probationary period will be 3,500 copper coins. After the 1-month probationary period, you will automatically become an official employee. Your salary will be determined according to your official job, but it won't be lower than the probationary period salary. Also, the restaurant will provide you with 3 meals and accommodation." Raina covered her gaping mouth with her hand. She still looked at Meg in disbelief. Was she really going to become an employee of Mamie's? She had only smelled some spices. Moreover, a probationary salary of 3,500 copper coins was already 1,000 copper coins higher than her current job. If her salary was even higher after she became an official employee, she would be able to buy better medicine for her mother. "Raina, have you decided?" Meg asked. "I'm willing." Raina quickly nodded and reached out to hold Meg's hand. There were tears in her eyes. She could finally get rid of that terrible job and give her mother better conditions. "Welcome to Mamie's big family," Meg said with a smile. Then, he let go of Raina's hand like a gentleman. "Hello, Raina. I'm Mia." Yabamiya went up to greet her. "Hello, I'm Gina." Gina could already introduce herself fluently in the common language. Everyone went up to greet Raina and introduce themselves while they were at it. No one had any objections to Meg choosing Raina as his new employee. She had perfectly distinguished all the spices and seasonings used in the hot pot just by smelling. Everyone was deeply impressed by that. "Can you tell me why you chose me?" Raina asked Meg curiously when they were signing the contract. "Your talent in distinguishing fragrances amazed me, but your character is what truly moved me." Meg looked at Raina and said with a smile, "If your talent in cooking is as good, I might have found a good sous chef." I don't think I can do it," Raina said with some uncertainty. Although she often imitated the delicacies of some restaurants, she only made them for her mother and a few good friends. She had never thought that the food she made could be eaten by customers, let alone in a high-end restaurant like Mamie's. Whether it works or not, we'll only know after we try. Meg smiled and shook his head. Seeing that Raina had already signed the contract, he looked at the time and asked, "When will you be able to hand over your last job?" "I'll resign today and come to work in the restaurant tomorrow," Raina said at once. "Okay, then leave your clothes size. I'll prepare work clothes for you. Report to the restaurant tomorrow morning before 7:30. Meg nodded. "Okay." Raina nodded and wrote down her clothes size on the paper. Then she said goodbye and left. "That's great. I've finally joined Mamie's." Raina opened the restaurant door and jumped out. She clenched her fists and shouted happily. Then, she raised her head and her gaze met the 2 rows of customers who were staring at her. Raina's expression suddenly froze and her face quickly turned red. She slowly closed her legs and smiled awkwardly but politely at the crowd. Then she immediately lowered her head and turned around to leave. "My God, why are there so many people? This is so embarrassing." Raina roared in her heart. "So this is the new waitress at Mamie's. She looks quite energetic. Yes, and she's quite cute. I'm so envious of this sister joining the freeloading group." The customers looked at Raina's back and discussed curiously. The news of Mamie's hiring had attracted a lot of attention in the past 2 days. After all, the waitresses in the restaurant were all as beautiful as flowers. What kind of waitress would join them became the focus of everyone's curiosity. In the crowd, Constantine, who was wearing a brand new robe, nervously tidied his clothes and touched his neatly oiled hair. He picked up the bouquet of flowers in his hand and put it down again. He looked back at Harrison, who was behind him, and said, "Brother, can you help me take a look and see if my clothes and hair are messy?" Harrison looked Constantine up and down and shook his head. "Pretty good. There's nothing wrong with him." "Thanks." Constantine heaved a sigh of relief. A smile appeared on his face again, and he was about to turn around. "No, I say, brother, you're dressed so neatly for a meal, and you even brought a bouquet of flowers. Don't tell me you're going to confess to Mr. Mac?" Harrison asked with a gossipy look. "Mr. Mac is into this." George, who was next to him, came over curiously. The surrounding customers all looked at Constantine curiously when they heard that. This young man was quite handsome. Why did he have such a fetish? Nonsense. I like women. How could I like men? Constantine said seriously. He held the bouquet and looked in the direction of Mamie's with anticipation. "Today, I'm going to confess my feelings to that beautiful lady. This time, I don't want to miss it again." "Which lady is it? Which beautiful waitress in the restaurant is so unlucky that you've taken a fancy to her?" Harrison was even more curious. The customers also looked at Constantine curiously. Confessing to a waitress in a restaurant was something that had never happened at Mamie's before. This kind of gossip was the best material to talk about. "You'll know in a while." Constantine didn't intend to reveal anything. He straightened his clothes, stood up straighter, and used deep breaths to regulate his heartbeat. Harrison shrugged in boredom. He could only wait for the restaurant to open. Ding! The restaurant's door opened outwards. Meg, who was wearing a chef's uniform, was standing at the entrance as usual. He welcomed everyone with a smile. Constantine's gaze quickly landed on Shirley in the restaurant, and his eyes moistened instantly. This was the lady that he had been thinking about day and night. "You're finally here in front of me again." The customers greeted Meg and filed in. Constantine's footsteps were a little exaggerated as he walked forward with the crowd. He directly passed by Meg and stood in front of Shirley. He swallowed nervously and said, "Miss Shirley, do you still remember me?" Shirley glanced at Constantine and calmly said, "No." Constantine's enthusiasm and bellyful of things that he wanted to say were suddenly doused with a basin of ice water. Chapter 1290. Meg looked at Constantine, who was dressed neatly with a bouquet of flowers in his hand, and suddenly pitied this infatuated man who came to ask about Shirley every day. What was love? It was so important that people would die for it. However, Mag wasn't in a position to say anything about this. After all, although Shirley was a crossdresser, he had never purposely acted like a woman. His sexual orientation and who he liked were none of Mag's business. The first tragedy before the new year. Harrison sighed as he walked past Constantine. The gossipy crowd also looked at Constantine with pity. This love that had not even sprouted was mercilessly killed just like that. It was really sad. Constantine quickly put away his disappointment and said with a smile, "It's okay. Let me introduce myself again. I am not interested." Shirley turned around coldly and walked to the kitchen. She was about to start her work. Constantine looked at Shirley's back. His mouth was open for a long time before he slowly closed it. His shoulders drooped in disappointment. Anna looked at Constantine pitifully. This uncle came to ask about Sister Shirley every day. He must really like her, but she did not seem to be interested in him. "That uncle looks like a dog," Amy said softly beside Anna as she licked her ice cream. "What dog?" Anna asked, puzzled. Amy thought for a while and said, "A lone dog." "It's okay. Since Miss Shirley is back, at least I still have a chance. Let's take it slow." Constantine's fighting spirit was quickly reignited. He smiled confidently, walked to his usual table, sat down, and began to order. "Shan, I succeeded." Raina called out excitedly when she returned to the company. She was still working when she saw Shan. "Succeeded." Shan looked up in confusion. Seeing Raina's smiling face, she suddenly realized something and jumped up from her chair. She grabbed Raina's hand excitedly and said, "Raina, did you succeed in getting hired at Amy's?" Yes. I was hired." Raina nodded vigorously. "That's great." The two girls hugged each other and jumped excitedly in the office. "It's office hours, what's with the noise?" A gloomy voice sounded from the door. Shan and Raina were shocked and quickly separated. They looked at the middle-aged woman in a long black dress standing at the door with a panicked expression. Bang! The woman walked in and slammed a thick ledger on the table. She looked at Raina and said coldly, "Raina, look at your ledger. Didn't I tell you to write down the information and time of every income and expenditure? Take a look and see how many of them don't have the time written on them. Also, what were these messy labels? I'm paying you to work. If you can't even do such a small thing, then get the hell out of here." "Okay, boss. From tomorrow onwards, I won't be coming to the company. Please find someone else," Raina said with a relaxed expression. She waved at Shan and turned to walk out the door. "You." The boss was stunned for a moment when she saw Raina turn and leave. She obviously didn't expect that this little clerk who was usually submissive and never dared to go against her would actually fire her without any hesitation. "Oh right, let me remind you. You should ask your dear brother and sister-in-law about the ledger. They might know more about where those expenses without the time and notes came from." Raina stopped and turned to look at the boss. She then turned and left. After leaving the company, Raina turned back and took a look at this place where she had stayed for 3 years. She turned and left without any reluctance. The moment she turned, she felt much more relaxed. Even the setting sun seemed to have become brighter. Even though her salary was deducted for half a month, the salary was just paid a few days ago. If she used it sparingly, she should be able to last until Mamie's next month. It was a salary of 3,500 yuan. When she received her salary next month, she could buy new clothes for her mother. After Connie carried the Buddha jumps over the wall and passed through 9 levels of the prison, she was finally surrounded by the prison guards. She was then brought to Lex. After the prison guards left, she went forward and asked, "Master, what are we learning today?" "You have learned a lot during this period of time. Tonight, you are going to kill a few people." Lex took the Buddha jumps over the wall, opened the lid, and took a deep sniff. She revealed a satisfied smile and said casually, "Killing people." Connie was slightly shocked. She flinched a little and said, "I don't know how to do that. What you learned from me was killing people. If you don't know how to kill people, are you going to learn how to kill chickens?" Lex took a sip of the soup and said with a smile. Connie shrugged and said innocently, "But I haven't even killed a chicken before. Those fellows who chased after you previously have their eyes on Mamie's. If you don't kill them, they will find you sooner or later. Then, they will kill you, or bring you back to kill you. What's the difference? It's a faster death or a slower death. Those fellows killed my father and my clansmen. I want to kill them for revenge." Connie clenched her fists and looked at Lex. She said, "Master, please help me kill them." Clang! Lex took out a short dagger from somewhere and threw it on the table. The address is at the second courtyard of the 3rd lane on the western road in the north of the city. There are a total of 5 orcs, and their abilities are between grade 6 and grade 7. If you are fast enough, you can slit their necks before they wake up. If you're not fast enough, any one of them can easily kill you. You really want me to go? Connie was a little anxious. Did you become my disciple because you wanted me to help you take revenge? Lex put down the spoon and asked while looking into Connie's eyes. Connie was slightly taken aback. She looked into Lex's eyes and shook her head. She picked up the dagger and held it tightly in her hand. She turned around and walked to the door. Then, she stopped and looked back at Lex. She asked, "Master, how do I get to the western road in the north of the city? Where do I start counting from for the 3rd lane? Does the second courtyard refer to the one on the left or the one on the right?" PFFF, Rex, who was drinking his soup, spat it out. He looked at his soup with some heartache, and then looked at Connie with a look of exasperation. "Can't you use your brain?" Connie pouted. "What can I do? I am in despair too. Wait here, I will bring you there in a while." Lex sighed with a headache. In order to prevent Connie from being unable to find the assassination target, he could only take on the role of a driver for the time being. Chapter 1291. "I am an emotionless killer," Rex said coldly as he flung his black windbreaker after walking out of the Bawtai prison. "I am a killer with no sense of direction," Connie said weakly as he put on the helmet. Rex, who was walking in front, staggered and almost fell. He turned around and knocked Connie's helmet with a chestnut. He said speechlessly, "Can you not wear your turtle shell when you're killing people?" Connie nodded. "Master, didn't you say that killers have to remain mysterious?" Connie said aggrievedly as he pulled up his goggles. "Wouldn't it be very mysterious if you killed everyone who saw you?" Rex pursed his lips. Indeed, rotten wood could not be carved. "Isn't that too cruel?" Connie was a little hesitant. "Remember, killers cannot be merciful. Once you are merciful, the person who will die might be you," Rex said seriously as he looked into Connie's eyes. Rex looked into Connie's eyes and said seriously. Then, he took off Connie's helmet and threw it onto the bicycle 50 meters away. It fell into the basket of the bicycle with a clang. Phew. Seriously. Even if I don't wear it when I am killing people, I can still keep myself warm on the road. Connie mumbled as he shuddered. Rex's eyelids twitched. What kind of person was this? He had taken in a disciple, and he had to teach her even if he had to hold back his tears. He coldly said, "Let's go." Oh. Connie quickly followed behind. Two black shadows flashed through the night sky of Chaos City like cats, silently flying over one roof after another as they made their way to the north of the city. Are you sure? Princess Connie is really hiding in that restaurant. In a room lit by a yellow oil lamp, 5 orcs were gathered around a wooden table, whispering to each other. Although she always wears a strange shell on her head when she goes in and out, the bracelet on her hand was given to her by the chief. It has an opal embedded in it. I happened to see it the day before yesterday, and followed her for 2 days. Be it her figure or the bracelet, I can basically confirm that she is Princess Connie, a skinny orc said with a nod. Humph. I didn't expect the princess of the Fog tribe to work as a service staff member in a restaurant. We've had such a hard time looking for her. Since we've already found her, we'll go and confirm it again tomorrow morning. Then, we'll take action at night to capture her. The chief has promised us a lot of benefits. When we return, we'll be big shots in the tribe. The orcs all laughed proudly. They had done a great service in this rebellion. As long as they could capture Princess Connie, they would enjoy endless women and money for the rest of their lives. They could even become the new chief's right-hand men. After making plans for tomorrow's operation, one of the orcs stayed behind to keep watch, while the rest of the orcs went to sleep separately to recuperate and prepare for tomorrow's capture. This is the place. Make sure you're clean. I'll wait for you for 10 minutes, Lex said coldly as 2 voices rang out at the entrance of the alley. All right. Connie took a deep breath, gripped her dagger tightly, and rushed to the second yard. It's that way. A hand clasped Lex's shoulder, and Lex helplessly pointed at the courtyard opposite her. How awkward would it be to kill the wrong person? Master, why didn't you say so earlier? Connie rolled her eyes at Rexha, then turned and charged towards another courtyard. She didn't make the slightest sound as her toes tapped against the wall. She arched her body and silently landed in the courtyard. How can you blame me for this? Rexha looked helpless. After landing in the yard lightly, Connie quickly approached the 3 rooms in the yard like a black cat. She stuck close to the rooms silently, and her standing cat ears trembled slightly as she listened to the slight movements in the rooms. There were people in all 3 rooms. 2 people were sleeping on the left and right sides, and 1 was sleeping in the middle. Judging from their breathing, they were all in a deep sleep. This was the best opportunity to hunt. Just as Connie was about to use her dagger to pry open the door bolt and enter the room, a light snoring sound came from the side. There's someone else. Connie, who was already nervous, trembled, and almost dropped her dagger. She took a few deep breaths to adjust her emotions, and reached out to hold onto the roof to swing to the other side of the room. She saw an orc hugging a mace and sleeping soundly against the wall. This is the fellow who killed my younger brother. Connie gripped her dagger tightly, and her face turned pale. She recalled the day when the rebel army invaded the palace and massacred everyone. This fellow was by Gary's side, and he used that mace to kill her younger brother. Revenge. I want revenge. There was only one thought left in Connie's mind. She let go of her hand, and fell from the roof. She drew her dagger out of the sheath silently, and pierced the heart of the orc who was still sleeping soundly precisely as she usually did. That orc woke up with a start, and stared at Connie, who was standing in front of him, with eyes wide open in disbelief. However, before he could make a sound, the dagger that was pulled out from his heart had already pierced into his mouth, and the back of his head was pierced. Connie pressed down on that orc's head, and pulled out the dagger slowly. She let him lean against the wall and slowly fall to the ground. She didn't make a sound the entire time. Connie took 2 steps back, and looked at that orc lying in a pool of blood. Her breathing became heavier, and her hand that was holding the dagger was trembling. Blood splattered all over her body and face, and the strong smell of blood made her feel a little nauseous. However, there was a glimmer in her eyes. She killed this bastard and took revenge for her younger brother. When she escaped from the Twilight Forest alone, she felt that she would never be able to take revenge in this lifetime. How could she, who had been weak since she was young, be a match for Gary and his subordinates? However, she had killed this opponent whom she once thought was undefeatable. This feeling was simply too amazing to her. After calming herself down, her gaze became calm again. She looked at the 3 rooms, and hesitated for a moment before walking to the room on the far right. The orc sleeping in the room in the middle was the most powerful, so she planned to kill the 4 weaker orcs first before dealing with the most powerful orc. Connie opened the door with the dagger, and entered the room very smoothly. Meanwhile, the 2 orcs who were snoring loudly had no idea about it. The sharp dagger slit the throats of the 2 orcs easily, and chopped off their heads. The 2 orcs didn't even have time to make a sound until they died. After wiping the dagger clean on the orc's clothes, Connie entered the room on the far left again in the same way, and used the dagger to chop off the heads of the 2 orcs. Bam! Right at this moment, the half-closed door was kicked open, and a tall orc stood at the door. When he saw Connie throwing an orc's head on the ground, his expression changed slightly, and he said, "It's you." Connie also panicked when she saw that orc who suddenly appeared. Why did this fellow wake up? However, after seeing that fellow's face clearly, the flames of hatred burned in her eyes again. It was this fellow who killed her mother. That orc raised his long saber, and coldly said, "Humph, I didn't expect you to send yourself to me. You even killed a few of my brothers. Today, I will carry your stab." With a soft sound, the tip of a sword pierced through his heart, interrupting his words. Rex gently pushed away the orc who died with his eyes wide open, and looked at Connie, who was covered in blood, as he said, "Since you want to kill everyone, then start from the most powerful one. That way, even if there are any accidents, it can be easily settled." "Got it. Got it, Master." Connie looked at Rex, and nodded vigorously. Then, she jumped into his arms and started sobbing softly. Chapter 1292. After saying goodnight to Amy and Irina, Meg went to the study alone. He took out a pen and paper, and began to sketch the design. Based on his calculations, the Night Elves would reach Chaos City in another 2 days. By then, he would have to arrange a place for them to stay and a complete textile factory. The Hill had already started to manufacture steam engines in batches. Meg should be able to get 10 steam engines from her by purchasing them. What he had to solve now was the textile machine. When he was writing his thesis, he had done some research on some inventions from the Middle Ages. Hence, it was not difficult to design a textile machine powered by a steam engine. Compared to a steam engine, the textile machine's technological standards were much lower. He should be able to solve it in Ma by next door. After finishing the textile machine blueprint overnight, Meg drew a simple design of the staff dormitory. According to the university's standards of 4-person dormitory, it would be the Night Elves' dormitory. Anyway, the empty space was big enough, so the space could be built as big as possible. He would find a large dwarven construction team tomorrow, and it would be completed in 2 days. On the big bed, Amy snuggled in Irina's arms as she stroked her flat tummy, and asked, "Mother, when are you and Father going to give birth to a little brother or sister for me to play with?" This. Irina pondered for a while before asking Amy, "Do you want a little brother or sister?" Little sister. Amy answered without even thinking. She then added, the Palmer family's little sister is super cute and soft. It's very comfortable to pinch. Irina looked at Amy's glowing eyes, and smiled. She scratched her nose gently, and said, but I want to give all my love to Amy. Just like now, I'm only hugging you. Amy shook her head with a smile, and said, it's okay. You love Amy, I love the little sister, and the little sister loves father. In this way, we will be a loving family. Isn't that great? I see. Irina pondered. If she were to have another child, she couldn't do it alone. The Spectre Archipelago was located in the boundless sea, and it got its name from the fact that a layer of gray mist lingered above the archipelago all day long. Those islands of different sizes were occupied by the various abyss devils. A large island near the center was controlled by the abyss demon race. At the bottom of the two nearly vertical cliffs, there were many magnificent stone palaces. At this moment, in one of the grandest halls, the plump abyssal overlord was standing on the main seat. He looked at the various leaders, and loudly said, this time, the 10 demon tribes have gathered here to form an alliance, and then negotiate with the king of the Roth Empire. If we conquer the entire continent, we'll decide which areas will belong to us, and which will belong to them. Do you have any opinions on this matter? Making a deal with humans. That's a race even more treacherous than goblins. We, the Flaming Tribe, don't trust humans, a demon covered in flames said loudly. That's right. Who do humans think they are? They only have a lousy sword and a stick, and they want to divide the world equally with us. This kind of alliance is really embarrassing, a tall and big demon said arrogantly. Do you dare to say this to Alex and Julian face to face? The vampire ancestor sneered as he drank a mouthful of blood. That tall and big demon choked. He looked at the vampire ancestor with a red face, but he still didn't dare to agree. Meanwhile, the hall suddenly became much quieter because of this. Everyone had heard the news 2 days ago. Alex had killed Borg, and once again displayed his strength that far exceeded that of an ordinary 10th-tier powerhouse. Previously, he had killed the spatial demon patriarch, Benson, which directly put the spatial demon's position as one of the 10 great demon tribes in jeopardy. As for Crassus and Julian, the two of them had worked together to slaughter the cannibals, and had also left a deep impression on the demons. They had to admit that the humans, who were looked down upon by the demons back then, had developed rapidly for hundreds of years. With their huge population base, they had a powerful strength that couldn't be ignored by the other races. We vampires don't have many people in the first place, and we don't need any territory. You can play with things like fighting for territory. We vampires won't participate in any wars, and we don't need to divide any territory. The vampire ancestor drank the bright red blood in the cup in one gulp, then stood up. He opened his hands, and a pair of huge black wings appeared behind him. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a black shadow and disappeared from the hole. As timid as a mouse. Even if he can fly, he's just a mouse that can fly. The demon who was insulted earlier curled his lips and sneered. Whoosh! A half-meter-long black iron plate flew in from outside the hall, and nailed between the demon's legs. That demon subconsciously got up and stepped back. With a rip, a big hole appeared in his pants. He quickly reached out to press on his crotch with an awkward expression. After the vampire ancestor left, the expressions of the leaders of the various races began to change. After that, there weren't many who clearly expressed that they wanted to join the alliance. This gathering was considered to have ended on a bad note. After business hours the next morning, Meg first went to the blacksmith shop in Mumbai and asked him to help make a few sets of textile machines. Mr. Mack, this machine is a little big. If you need it urgently, I can find a few familiar blacksmiths to make it together. I can deliver it to you in 2 days. Malbai looked at the blueprint carefully for a while and said to Meg. Okay, but because this thing is a little special, it needs to be kept a secret. If you find other blacksmiths, you still have to take the parts apart. Meg nodded. Well, I understand. I'll take it apart and find someone to make it. Malbai nodded. Mr. Mack had a lot of strange ideas, but in order to not be plagiarized by others, it was normal to pay attention to it. After coming out of the blacksmith shop in Malbai, Meg went to the Buffett Manor to look for Hill. Finally, under the guidance of his assistant, he saw Hill at a bank. Mr. Meg, you want 10 steam engines. Hill put down the bill in her hand and looked at Meg. Yes, I plan to use the steam engine to build a textile factory. Meg nodded. He did not plan to hide this matter. Oh. Mr. Meg, have you thought about how to commercialize the steam engine? Sheer looked at Meg with a surprised expression. Her engineers were all researching how to use the steam engine outside of the locomotive. Even though they had made some progress, they still hadn't been able to implement any concrete projects. Let's test the water first. I bought a factory in the north of the city, but I don't know how effective it will be. Meg smiled. I see. Hill saw that Meg was unwilling to reveal the details. She thought for a while and smiled. Mr. Meg is opening a factory. I wonder if I can join in the fun, invest some money, and get some shares. The factory is still a wasteland. Miss Hill, aren't you afraid that this investment will go down the drain? Meg asked in return. I may be worried about other people, but when it's Mr. Meg, I'm not worried. Even if it goes down the drain, I'm willing to do it. Hill smiled. Meg thought for a while and said, in that case, Miss Hill will invest 10 million copper coins and 10 steam engines. You will get 10% of the shares. What do you think of this investment method? I think it's not bad. Hill wrote a Buffett Banks note and pushed it to Meg. She smiled and said, the 10 steam engines can be handed over to Mr. Meg tomorrow. Tell me the address, and I'll send someone to deliver it. Chapter 1293. The negotiation with the Hill went much smoother than expected, and they managed to get an angel investment. After signing the contract, Meg left the bank. 10 million copper coins and 10 steam engines in exchange for 10% of the shares. Actually, Meg wasn't greedy at all. The textile industry market wasn't small. Although Meg only wanted to find something for the night elves to do at the moment so that they wouldn't be bored out of their minds, once the textile factory powered by steam engines started operating, it would be a place where the night elves would have a steady stream of military funds. Meg could fork out 10 million copper coins himself, but he knew very well that he couldn't earn all the money himself. Letting a little profit go to the Hill would be very beneficial for opening up sales and cash flow in the future. Young mistress, he only said some empty words, and asked for 10 million copper coins. Isn't this a little too hasty? The assistant said to the Hill, who was checking the bill. Perhaps Mr. Meg is thinking about how much profit he gave me. The Hill didn't look up, but a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. If he's willing to become a businessman, there aren't many people on the Norland continent who can earn more money than him. The assistant was silent. Young mistress was very good at reading people, and rarely made mistakes. Meg went to the construction workshop in the east of the city, and found a strong dwarf construction team. He signed the construction contract for the construction of the factory's staff dormitory and the renovation of the factory at a price of 5 million copper coins. The dwarf contractor checked the blueprint carefully, and then went to the site with Meg. After hearing Meg's request, he nodded and said, the blueprint is a little complicated. We will complete the construction according to the blueprint in 2 days. You can pay us the balance after that. It's a pleasure working with you. Meg shook hands with him. He could find a cheaper construction team, but only this construction team could guarantee that the construction would be completed in 2 days. When Meg returned to the restaurant, Irina was sitting behind the counter and rubbing Ugly Duckling's fat face out of boredom. Ugly Duckling rolled its eyes with a dejected expression, but it didn't dare to say anything despite its fury. Only then did Irina let go of Ugly Duckling's round face. She turned to Meg and asked, "How was it? Did it go smoothly?" We've already found the construction team. The construction will start today, and it will be completed by the day after tomorrow. This will ensure that the night elves will have a place to stay when they come to Chaos City. The machine has also begun to be customized, and it won't be long before it can be put into use. Meg smiled and nodded. "What does this factory do?" Irina asked. Meg suddenly remembered that he hadn't told Irina about this. He quickly explained, "The textile factory is a factory that makes cotton into cotton cloth. However, the production has been changed from manual production to machine production to increase the output." Oh. Irina pondered for a while, but still couldn't understand what machine could replace manual labor. She could only nod and pretend to understand. Then, she curiously asked, "Then, what's the name of this factory?" Meg was really stumped by the question. He had been thinking about the factory and the machines for the past few days, and hadn't seriously considered the name of the company. He asked Irina, "Do you have any ideas?" Irina thought for a while, and said, "If the restaurant is called Mamie's, then the factory will be called IMI Textile Factory." "What about me?" Meg asked meekly. "Then, didn't you think of me when you came up with the name of the restaurant?" Irina asked as she looked into Meg's eyes. Meg opened his mouth slightly, but didn't know what to say. He could only nod, and said, "All right. Let's call it IMI then." What could he do? He couldn't win against her. "I thought about it on the way here today." The news of the Night Elves establishing a foothold in Chaos City would spread very quickly, and many people would definitely set their eyes on the factory. Hence, to avoid some trouble, we have to sever the relationship between the restaurant and the factory for the time being, Meg said after confirming the name of the company. If those fellows set their eyes on the restaurant now, it would indeed be quite troublesome. Irina nodded. Although Chaos City was a relatively safe place, Amy was still young, after all, and Meg hadn't fully recovered his power yet. Once their enemies came looking for them and plotted against them, they would be in a very passive situation. Irina pondered for a while, and said, "Then, how about this? I won't manage the restaurant anymore. I'll go to the factory to be my boss, and you'll be the restaurant's boss. We're both bosses." "That works too. Tell the public that I've invested in the company. Because the Night Elves' labor force is relatively cheap, I've chosen to accept all the Night Elves, and recruited you to be the leader of the company." Meg nodded. Although the traces were a little obvious, this explanation seemed pretty good on the surface. "What do you think about the peace talks between the races in a month's time?" Irina asked Meg again. Meg solemnly said, "Judging from the current situation, there's a high possibility that the talks will fall through. Apart from a few weaker races, all the strong races have a very strong desire to redistribute their territories. They're also keen on restarting the racial war and using force to reset the territory. If it's only a month's time, I'm afraid the Night Elves won't be able to overthrow the Wind Forest's rule." Irina shook her head with a hint of worry in her eyes. Once the racial war started, how the elves were going to protect themselves would become a huge problem. The racial war will engulf every race, and bring about endless chaos and suffering. Therefore, we have to try our best to prevent the war from restarting. Meg walked to the mural on the map of the Norland continent, and looked at the territories that had been divided by the various races. A storm was about to sweep across the continent, and in places that they couldn't see, there were clouds of black fog appearing quietly. Meg still didn't know what this meant. What can we do? After 100 years of development, the original balance between the various races on the continent has been broken. What we have to do is to bring it back to balance, and buy more time for the integration of the entire continent. Meg used his finger to draw a circle on Chaos City in the middle of the map. Just like Chaos City, since the various races can coexist peacefully in a city, and see the Norland continent as a bigger city, why can't they coexist peacefully as long as they can break the borders and exchange what they need? Interesting. Irina was deep in thought as she tilted her head to look at Meg. She suddenly felt that the way he thought about problems seemed to be a little different. He started to think about other things besides swords. Meg retracted his gaze from the map, and looked at Irina as he said, "We only have a month's time to make the various races give up on restarting the war. I've made some plans, but I don't know if it's feasible. Do you want to take a look?" "I don't want to see it now." Irina shook her head, and moved closer to Meg. She curled her lips slightly, and said, "Little Meg told me last night that she wants a little sister. Thought you're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."